Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Abril Perez Sagayan. Abril Perez Sagayan was born in 1971 in Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico. Her mother, Maria del Socorro, worked diligently 7 days a week to ensure her 3 children, Abril, Javier, and Ana, had the opportunity for the best possible education and a bright future. Even at a young age, Abril displayed an exceptional aptitude for science and made it her goal to pursue higher education and financial independence. As Abril matured, she embodied a unique combination of intelligence, compassion, and physical beauty. Her sociable nature and innate leadership qualities made her an inspiration to her friends and a standout professional in her field. She earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Nuevo León and a master's degree in business from the Monterrey Institute of Technology. As Abril's career progressed, she discovered her passion for digital sales and rapidly climbed the ranks. She attained a prominent position as an executive director at Bilbao Bank in the United States. During the early 1990s, a time when Abril's professional accomplishments were flourishing, she met Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. Juan Carlos was an ambitious entrepreneur, born on November 11, 1968. Juan Carlos and Abril discovered they had a lot in common. Both had attended the Monterrey Institute of Science and Technology, where Abril studied and Juan Carlos earned his degree with high academic achievement. Juan Carlos had also studied at top U.S. universities, including the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard. With his education and experience, he considered himself a professional entrepreneur in e-commerce and financial technology. Juan and Abril became inseparable, collaborating on projects and socializing in the same friend circle. As time passed, their friendship blossomed into romance. After a few years of dating, they decided to tie the knot, and their wedding took place in 1994. Their collaboration led to numerous successful projects, including the online stores Pag Mobile and Plascom. They also played a key role in the development of the Dem store, which became a leading e-commerce platform in Mexico. By 1999, their life appeared to be a perfect fairy tale, with both partners achieving great success in their careers and enjoying a happy relationship. Their joy was further amplified with the birth of their first child, Ana Cecilia, in 2001. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Juan Carlos Jr., followed by another son, Julio Andres, in 2005. Despite their busy schedules, Abril prioritized her children's needs, taking care of them personally and attending their school activities. Abril's devotion earned her the respect and admiration of those around her. Juan Carlos was also a dedicated father, and together they created a seemingly ideal family that many people envied. However, behind the facade, the family was struggling with difficulties, and all members suffered due to Juan's short temper. Juan was a cruel man who frequently lashed out at anyone who crossed his path. His behavior towards his wife, Abril, began with verbal abuse, making her feel uncomfortable and hurt with his insulting words. Over time, the situation worsened, and Juan started using physical violence against Abril, regularly beating her. Abril attempted to conceal the abuse from her friends and family, fearing that she wouldn't be able to provide for their children on her own. She believed that staying with Juan would give their children a better future. However, by 2009, the situation had become so severe that others began to suspect what was happening in the family. Abril has always kept it a secret from her friends and family, but whenever they asked about a possible divorce, she insisted that she wouldn't leave Juan. By 2014, Juan had reached the pinnacle of his career, becoming a prominent figure in Amazon's retail industry in Mexico. A year later, when Juan became the director of Amazon in Mexico, the family had to relocate to Mexico City. Abril hoped that the change of scenery would resolve their problems, but unfortunately, the abuse continued. Juan Carlos presented himself as a loving husband and father to the public, but behind closed doors, he was abusive and controlling towards his wife, Abril. He would often post on social media about how much he loved her, but in reality, he was constantly accusing her of cheating and even hired a private investigator to gather evidence. Despite his successful career, which included becoming the director of e-commerce at a multinational company, his marriage was deteriorating. The tension between him and Abril became unbearable, and after a trip to Monterrey to celebrate Christmas with her family, she realized she couldn't stay in the marriage any longer. During the trip, Juan's anger boiled over, and he physically attacked Abril, grabbing her by the neck and strangling her. He had received a photo from the private investigator of Abril with a male colleague, which he mistakenly believed was her lover. In reality, the man was just a co-worker. Abril decided not to engage with Juan's accusations and instead filed for divorce on January 4, 2019. They had already separated and planned to inform their children about their impending divorce. However, the situation took a violent turn one early morning. Abril was asleep when she was suddenly struck on the head with a baseball bat by her partner, Juan. Initially disoriented, Abril thought the ceiling had collapsed, but as her vision cleared, she saw Juan standing over her. She attempted to push him away and escape, but he overpowered her, prompting her to scream for help. Their 16-year-old son rushed to his mother's aid, quickly assessing the situation and intervening to prevent Juan from causing further harm. He managed to get Abril away from Juan and escorted her out of the house to seek emergency medical attention for her injuries. After the incident, Juan took to social media to share his side of the story. He made several posts claiming that Abril had been unfaithful, stolen his money, and wasted 26 years of his life. He also alleged that Abril had physically attacked him, stabbing him in the chest with a knife. To support his claims, he attached photos of the knife and what appeared to be bloodstains. One of Juan's friends responded by recording a video asking people to share the information. However, Juan's posts became increasingly bizarre. At one point, he even posted a message claiming that Abril had taken her life, despite being clearly alive. This move remains puzzling to this day. Meanwhile, Abril had been recovering in the hospital. After her discharge, she immediately filed a police report against her husband. The authorities sided with her, granting her custody of their 2 children and ordering Juan to pay 6,000 Mexican pesos, approximately $1,350, in monthly alimony. However, this amount was deemed insufficient to cover the costs of raising their 2 minors. After overcoming her initial fear and financial struggles, Abril began a new chapter in her life, driven by her determination to create a better future for her children. She relocated to Monterrey with her kids, where she attended Juan Carlos' trial and filed for divorce. Reflecting on her traumatic experience and the abuse she suffered, Abril reevaluated her life. She joined a Christian organization that supported families and started working as a divorce counselor. Her ultimate goal was to establish a support system for women who had endured similar abuse, just as she had. As Abril worked towards rebuilding her life, the court proceedings against Juan Carlos continued. 9 months after the attack, Juan was formally charged with attempted murder. The case was then brought to court, where Judge Federico Mask ordered Juan's informal arrest. Consequently, Juan was incarcerated for several weeks. Juan appealed the verdict, and on November 3, 2019, Judge Hector Jimenez reviewed the case. He found the hospital photographs and Abril's testimony, along with that of her son, insufficient to prove Juan's guilt. The judge also believed that if Juan had intended to kill Abril, he would have done so. Additionally, he considered the baseball bat used in the attack to be a blunt object, rather than a deadly weapon. As a result, the charges were downgraded, and the preliminary arrest was cancelled. With only a few hearings remaining, the outcome of the case was uncertain, causing Abril and her loved one significant anxiety and frustration. In a desperate attempt to have her concerns heard, Abril wrote to the judge, expressing her fears for her life and pleading for him to consider the threat Juan posed. However, her letter was ignored. Juan then began a custody battle for their children. Abril was forced to leave Monterrey and travel to Mexico City for the remaining hearings. She also had to subject her children to psychological evaluations, as Juan had claimed in his lawsuit that Abril had manipulated them into rejecting him. A week before a critical court hearing, Abril sat down with her 3 children to express her love and wishes for their future. She encouraged them to chase their dreams and find the strength to forgive their father. This conversation seemed like a farewell, as if Abril sensed that it might be her last opportunity to reassure her children of her love. On November 25, 2019, Abril followed her ex-husband's instructions to avoid potential legal issues that could have led to her separation from her children. She traveled to Mexico City, coincidentally on the same day that thousands of women marched in the streets to commemorate the International Day Against Gender-Based Violence on March 19, 2021. The court reclassified a case involving violence against Abril, which occurred in January 2019, as attempted murder. This decision was made after Abril's relatives and the prosecutor filed several petitions for judicial review, ultimately leading to the cancellation of the original decision. 2 months later, on May 23, the remaining suspects in Abril's murder case were apprehended, including 3 women and 1 man. The investigation resulted in the issuance of 3 search warrants and 8 arrest warrants. During the first search, 48-year-old Amanda Vicente Rodriguez was taken into custody. A series of arrests were made in connection with a recent crime. In the Jardín de Morelos colony, 34-year-old Mabel Montelier Morena and 48-year-old Garcia Alicia Flores Valdez were taken into custody, and their mobile phones were seized. Another arrest was made in the Alvar Aragon colony in Mexico City, where 50-year-old Isa Jalil Castillo, also known as Aguirre or Alvar's godmother, was detained. At the same time, 9 gang members were apprehended, with 7 of them allegedly linked to the Abril case. However, one suspect, Juan Carlos, remained at large, prompting authorities to reissue a warrant for his arrest. General Prosecutor Ernesto Godoy explained that the initial warrant was for attempted murder, while the new one was for the actual killing of a woman. Despite efforts to locate Juan, he remained elusive. In a surprising turn of events, a man named Rolf, also known as El Chalón, contacted the authorities and claimed to have information about the case. During questioning, he revealed that he was the one who had actually pulled the trigger and taken Abril's life. The perpetrator, Rodolfo Daniel Bendis, eventually pleaded guilty to the crime. He claimed that Juan Carlos had promised to pay him $10,000 to carry out the crime. According to Bendis, Juan Carlos had contacted him while he was in pre-trial detention and provided him with the address of Abril in Mexico City. Juan Carlos allegedly instructed Bendis to spy on Abril and provided written instructions on how to commit the crime. He also promised to provide Bendis with a gun in Monterrey. However, when Bendis arrived in Monterrey, no one contacted him, and he did not receive the gun. He returned to Mexico City and did not hear from Juan Carlos again until after his release from prison. Upon his release, Juan Carlos contacted Bendis again and informed him that the plan had changed. He now wanted Abril to be killed in Mexico City, as he had managed to lure her there. The case was divided into multiple hearings due to the complexity of the judicial system. The first trial began in August 2022, with Bendis and Juan Carlos as the initial defendants. During this trial, the prosecution presented 28 witness statements and 14 pieces of expert evidence. During the recent trial, a key defendant known as El Shang Galan testified about his role in planning and committing the crime of feminicide, for which he had previously pleaded guilty. On May 19, 2023, the court delivered its verdict, finding Rodolfo Danielo Baza and Juan Carlos Rodriguez guilty and sentencing them to 52 years in prison. Additionally, they were ordered to pay approximately 56,000 Mexican pesos, $30,000 US in damages. Following the trial, the men were taken to a detention center to begin serving their sentences. However, the Abril family immediately announced their intention to appeal the verdict, as they believed the sentence was too lenient. They pointed out that Rodolfo was the one who fired the fatal shots. As for the remaining defendants, it was previously decided in October 2014 that their trials would be divided. This decision was met with an appeal from prosecutors, who argued that it would significantly delay the proceedings and result in unnecessary additional costs for the court. The tragic case of Abril continues to affect her family and the wider Mexican society, and despite the recent verdict, the trials are not yet over. After the court hearing, Abril got into a car with her children and their lawyer. She asked the lawyer to drive them to the airport for their flight back to Monterrey. En route, they stopped at an intersection, where a motorcyclist pulled up beside them. The motorcyclist, who was actually a hired assassin, shot Abril multiple times in the head. Luckily, her children, who were seated in the back, escaped serious harm. One child, who was lying down, was grazed by a bullet but suffered only minor injury. Abril was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to save her life. Despite their efforts, she succumbed to her injuries 6 hours later. The lawyer immediately contacted Abril's family to inform them of the tragedy. Her brother Javier traveled to Mexico City to handle the aftermath of the incident. The community suspected Juan Carlos of being involved in the crime, but the authorities took a different stance. Since the shooter's identity and motives were unknown, they couldn't classify the case as femicide and make an arrest. Instead, the case was initially treated as a murder, and the police launched an investigation to gather evidence that could potentially prove it was a femicide. Abril's friend took to social media to accuse Juan Carlos, but her account was deleted as a result. Abril's family was fearful that the perpetrator would go unpunished and sought to raise public awareness about the case through social media. The fact that Abril died on a day dedicated to fighting gender-based violence added a deeper significance to her death. The family organized protests and marches to demand justice for Abril. Following Abril's tragic death, social media erupted in outrage as people realized that she had repeatedly expressed her fear of her abuser, only to be ignored by the authorities. Her family and friends held a funeral mass at the Benito Flores Chapel in Monterrey, where dozens gathered to pay their respects and demand justice for Abril. The funeral procession then proceeded to the Pantheon Garden in Los Angeles, where Abril was laid to rest. Her case has sparked widespread attention to the issue of gender-based violence, particularly in cases where judges release men who have attacked women. Abril's ex-husband, Juan Carlos, was released from prison after appealing his sentence, and was able to track Abril down to Mexico City, where he ultimately took her life. In response to Abril's case, the Mexican General Prosecutor's Office has launched an investigation into the judges who allowed Juan Carlos to be released from prison. The judges in question, Carlos Trillo Rodriguez, Federico Mosa Gonzalez, and Hector Jimenez Lopez, are being investigated for their roles in Juan Carlos' release. Additionally, representatives of the party of former Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador are calling for Judge Mosa's removal from office, citing his involvement in a previous controversial case in which he released a doctor who had disrespected a patient in a public hospital. The judge initially declined to charge Juan Carlos with femicide, instead only charging him with sexual violence, after which he was released from custody. During the public outcry surrounding the Abril case, Rafael Guerra, the president of the Supreme Court of Mexico City, suspended all judges involved in the case on November 29. Mexico City's head of government, Claudia Sheinbaum, stated that the government would investigate Abril's death. She also warned that the judges involved in the case could be held accountable for Abril's death if it was proven that Juan Carlos was responsible. Local and international media reported that Juan Carlos was released despite evidence against him. Abril's family established a non-profit organization called The Voice of Abril to provide support to victims of violence, including information, psychological assistance, and legal aid. The public demonstrations sparked by Abril's death prompted the prosecutor's office to reclassify the case against Juan Carlos, seeking to prosecute him for attempted murder, which could result in his imprisonment. After being charged, Juan Carlos took to social media to claim that he wanted justice for the crime against Abril and that the perpetrator should be punished. He also stated that he was willing to cooperate with the police, despite having a troubled marriage with Abril, and he would never have wanted her to meet such a tragic end. However, his post sparked widespread discontent among the community. His 18-year-old daughter, Ana Cecilia, publicly spoke out against her father, accusing him of physically and mentally abusing her, her siblings, and Abril over the years. She shared disturbing photos of Abril's injuries after being attacked with a baseball bat. Ana described her father as a narcissistic sociopath who allegedly bribed his way out of prison. During the ongoing investigation and protests, an arrest warrant was issued for Juan Carlos, but it was not directly related to the Abril case. Instead, it was due to him violating judicial duties. Although he was released on the condition that he would check in with the police station weekly, he failed to do so. After missing 2 court hearings, Judge Agustin Monra Gasper Cannell was left with no choice but to issue the order. Juan wrote a letter claiming he feared for his life and did not want to attend the hearings, stating he and his family had received death threats since Abril's death. He believed someone would seek revenge if he appeared in court. However, the judge rejected this excuse and issued an arrest warrant, also restricting Juan from leaving the country. The investigation continued, aiming to uncover the truth. A letter from Juan was discovered, in which he again denied involvement in Abril's death, claiming he never intended to harm her. He described the night of the incident, stating that Abril had initiated a fight, stabbing him in the side, and he had hit her with a bat in self-defense. The letter sparked outrage among those who heard it, with no one believing Juan's account. The investigation has revealed that Juan Carlos is the primary suspect in the case. Further investigation by the police has identified at least 7 other individuals involved in the crime against Abril. This conclusion was reached after reviewing surveillance footage from the area where the events occurred. The footage shows 2 cars following Abril as she left the courthouse. The drivers of these cars were in contact with the perpetrator who fatally shot Abril. After the attack, the perpetrator and their cars fled the scene. Although the identities of the pursuers were not yet known at the time, the investigation suggested that Juan Carlos may have been involved in the crime. According to investigators, Juan Carlos likely met these individuals while he was in prison and paid one of them to protect him. After his associates were released from prison, Juan Carlos was also released. He then paid them to kill Abril. Notably, Juan Carlos was the only one who knew Abril's route to Mexico City, as he had requested to meet her. After the shocking details of the case became public, no law firm was willing to defend the suspect, Juan Carlos. Meanwhile, Abril's loved ones and colleagues cooperated fully with law enforcement, providing any information that could aid in his capture. However, sources from the General Prosecutor's Office soon revealed that Juan Carlos had managed to flee Mexico by crossing the border into the United States. Mexican authorities swiftly alerted Interpol, which launched a global manhunt for Juan Carlos. As a result, he became a wanted man in over 151 countries, with authorities determined to apprehend him at all costs. By the end of January 2024, the case had gone cold, with no new leads or updates. 4 years have passed since Abril's tragic death, yet the true perpetrators remain unpunished. Her children are now living with her family on the outskirts of Mexico City, holding on to the hope that justice will eventually be served. The question on everyone's mind remains, where is Juan Carlos? His capture is still the top priority for the authorities. Abril's family has vowed to continue fighting for justice until Juan Carlos is found and brought to justice. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat, the case of John Thomas McGuire. Amanda and Anna Marie McClure were two sisters who lived in an orphanage. Living in an orphanage can be extremely challenging. You don't have a place of your own or time to yourself, and if you're unable to stand up for yourself, you're at risk of being bullied by kids who have been there longer. Typically, bullies target children who are loners. Sisters Amanda and Anna Marie McClure were luckier than most because they can always protect each other. They feel comfortable being around each other and don't try to make friends with anyone. Unfortunately for Anna Marie and Anna Marie, their family secret is about to be revealed. Their father, Larry, has been convicted and imprisoned, and this news has been widely broadcast on television by various news sources. One day, the McClure sisters, Amanda and Anna Marie, helped a new girl named Meredith who was being bullied. Meredith had been living with her mother, who was addicted to drugs. After her mother's death from an overdose, Meredith was too afraid to call for help and stayed with her mother's body for a few days. It wasn't until a friend visited and found her mother's body that emergency services were called. Meredith soon became friends with the McClure sisters, and the three of them had a lot of fun together. Amanda and Anna Marie never told anyone why they were living in an orphanage. And when Meredith asked, Anna Marie made up a story about their father being a police officer who died while on duty to catch a dangerous criminal. Meredith was so impressed with Anna Marie's story that she told it to the other children at the camp. Overnight, the McClure sisters became heroes and were admired by everyone. Most of the kids in the shelter had parents who had died from substance abuse or were in prison, so the McClure sisters' story made them stand out in a positive way. The sisters' secluded life at the orphanage came to an end when all the children wanted to befriend them. However, this marked the beginning of a difficult period in their lives. A heartbreaking truth comes to light: their father, presumed dead, is actually alive and serving a prison sentence for violence and sex crimes he committed against minors. The sisters' lives became a nightmare. However, they got a second chance when two different families decided to adopt them. This meant they would be living apart, and their bond was eventually broken. Amanda, who had previously worried her adoptive parents. They were worried that she would be single forever, and that not having a biological family had a profound effect on her mental health. Amanda's adoptive parents were relieved to learn that she was in a serious relationship with a man named John Thomas McGuire, who was 38 years old. This would be his second marriage, and he had two sons from a previous marriage. What reassured them even more was that John seemed to be a perfect partner and always supported her. He also had a friendly relationship with his ex-wife, which was a good sign for Amanda's future with him. After serving his sentence, Larry McClure was pardoned and settled in Virginia. His first priority was to find his daughters. He went straight to Amanda's foster parents, Glenn and Alex, said hello and introduced himself. He asked to see Amanda and requested her contact information, including her address and phone number. Although Larry appeared disheveled and intimidating, with deep wrinkles and dark circles under his eyes, he didn't seem intoxicated. However, his behavior was not quite right. Glenn, Amanda's foster parent, refused Larry's request but promised to inform Amanda that her biological father was looking for her. Larry was taken aback by the term biological father, but he thanked Glenn and left. Glenn did keep his promise. He told Amanda that her father was free and was looking for her. Amanda was torn, with a part of her wanting to reject her father, given his past mistakes, and another part wanting to give him another chance. Amanda reaches out to her father, Larry, after many years of separation. Amanda initiates the conversation by calling her father, who is overjoyed to hear from her. Larry asks about her well-being, and she shares that she's doing well, married, and happy. Larry was very happy for his daughter and invited her and her husband to have dinner with him. Amanda is initially uncertain about meeting her father, but he senses her hesitation and reassures her by telling her to forget the old grudges, and he has lived all these years with only one thought: to see her and Marie. This suggests that Larry has been thinking about his daughters and wants to see them again. Larry's meetings with Amanda and John led to their introduction to the world of illegal substances, which he manufactured himself in his camper. Initially, their financial situation was stable, but Larry manipulated them into funding his substance production. As their addiction deepened, they both lost their jobs. Larry persuaded John to register as a drug addict to receive $180 in state assistance. However, this amount was insufficient to support their habit, and Larry continued to exploit them for money. Meanwhile, Larry met Anna Marie and repeated the same pattern, getting her hooked on substances and taking her money. Amanda and John's situation spiraled out of control. They accumulated huge debts, lost their house, and were forced to move into Larry's camper. John's parents, who were unaware of the situation, were told that they was going on a trip together. In reality, Amanda and John had become entrenched in a cycle of substance abuse and alcohol consumption with Larry, and John's parents have never heard from their son since. On Valentine's Day, John, still reeling from the effects of substance abuse, planned a romantic evening for his wife Amanda at the family circle. He cooked a fancy dinner, inviting Larry and Anna Marie to join them. However, under the prolonged influence of the drugs, a disturbing situation unfolded. Amanda and Larry, who were supposed to be father and daughter, began to develop an inappropriately close relationship. Sadly, John was unaware of this, and as a result, he became redundant in their twisted relationship. During the meal, John spoke very many warm words to Amanda, which made Larry extremely anxious. As the tension increased, Larry interrupted John's speech and asked if he could be completely honest with his wife. John agreed, and Larry suggested a game. They tied John's legs and instructed him to answer truthfully about his life. Initially, the questions covering topics like childhood and school. However, under the influence of drugs, Larry began to accuse John of being an undercover FBI agent. When John denied this, they hit him. Although John begging for mercy, but he was ultimately struck on the head with a bottle of wine, the same wine he had brought for the family dinner. Over the course of 2 days, Larry, Amanda, and Anna Marie subjected John to torture while using illegal substances. When they thought it was time to end things, Amanda put a black bag over John's head and tightened it around his neck until he stopped breathing. They buried John in the backyard and then celebrated the engagement of Larry and Amanda, father and daughter, with more drugs and alcohol. On the 3rd day, their mental health worsened. They began to hallucinate, seeing John's ghost, hearing police sirens, and imagining that the ground where they buried John was disturbed as if he might escape and report everything to the authorities. The situation was chaotic, but the father and daughters still decided to take more drastic action. They dug up John's body, checked his pulse, and examined his pupils' reaction to light, even though he showed clear signs of decomposition. This, however, did not convince them that he was truly gone. In a frantic bid to prevent John from coming back to life, they dismembered his body with a wood axe and drove aspen stakes into each piece. They then buried the remains in different locations and covered them with lime to accelerate the decomposition process. 3 weeks later, Larry and Amanda got married. To conceal their relationship, Larry changed his name. The new family aimed to start afresh, moving to Kentucky. They promised each other to stop using illegal substances for good. To avoid suspicion, they even hung an American flag over their front door, just like their neighbors did. By this time, John's ex-wife and parents were becoming increasingly concerned about his lack of contact. In 2019, John's mother even filed a police report regarding his disappearance. Meanwhile, Larry failed to inform the police about his move to another state, which violated his probation terms and led to his return to prison. Larry's mental state deteriorated, especially after long-term substance abuse and alcohol use. This sent him into rehab, leading to anxiety and confusion between what was real and what wasn't, reflected in his disturbing behavior. Larry suspected that the parole violation was merely a pretext for authorities to search his backyard for John's remains. He felt an urgent need to contact Amanda or Anna Marie and instruct them to dig up the body parts and rebury them far from their home. Since all prisoner calls are monitored, he had to find a discreet way to communicate this information. Larry meticulously prepared a speech to convey his message, but ultimately, he was denied the opportunity to make calls. Unable to cope with the situation any longer, he decided to confess to the police. Larry thought that if he confessed to the murder before being charged, he might avoid the death penalty. He even considered blaming his daughters to make his situation better. However, the police officer did not believe him. First of all, what murder? What body parts were buried in the backyard? What crazy idea did this man have? Legally, they had to verify his claims. Initially, the police planned to conduct an investigation. They took his statement, and they found out that John was indeed missing. A police unit was sent to Larry's house. First on the scene, investigators found evidence that Larry had mentioned, confirming all of the criminal's statements. The McClure sisters were quickly apprehended. Amanda and Anna Marie were in shock, unable to believe that their father and stepfather could confess to such a brutal murder. They were even more stunned to learn that Larry was trying to portray himself as an innocent bystander, claiming in his testimony that it was his daughters who killed John, and he was just unwittingly involved in the crime. As the investigation unfolded, each the family McClure member sought to protect themselves and convinced the police that their involvement was purely accidental. This situation was particularly difficult for John's relatives because there was no body, only remains were found. Those remains had to be carefully collected by forensic experts, transported to his parents, and ultimately buried in a closed coffin. It has been mentioned many that John was a kind person. Despite the challenges they faced, his parents were able to arrange for his burial. Some friends contributed financially, while others assisted with transportation and funeral planning. John was laid to rest at a Lutheran church on October 25, 2019. On February 15, the day after Valentine's Day, a member of the McClure family posted on Facebook, claiming it was a message from John. The post stated that he was going on a long trip and would be out of touch, asking friends not to worry about his absence. This raised suspicions that the family McClure had planned to kill John, and they wanted to deceive others to avoid causing panic. Despite the severity of the crime, but during the trial, Larry and Amanda received an additional 6 months in their sentence due to their illegal father-daughter marriage, which is prohibited in the state. The trial began, and Larry testified. He revealed that he had always felt remorse for his children throughout his life. He explained that when they were very young, he committed a serious crime that led to them being placed in an orphanage. Their birth mother had abandoned them, and he was the only one left feeling heartbroken. Larry expressed deep gratitude towards the families who adopted his children, mentioning that he had even prayed for their adoptive parents in churches. He desperately wanted to make up for the years gone by with them and admitted that this might be why he made the choices he did. He describes John as a wonderful young man and expresses his grief for him. He says that if he could change the past, he would, but emphasizes that no one can bring the dead back to life. He mentions his deep love for his daughter Amanda. However, he notes that Amanda does not care about John, her only concern is taking money from his account. He questions whether anyone would consider killing someone for $180, and that people should recognize Amanda for what she was. He called her a monster, not a human. He stated that he, Amanda and Marie, were addicted to drugs and that they deserved to be punished for their actions. He expressed his desire to speak to the jury and said that regardless of his sentence, he was aware of his health problems and believed that he might not live more than 10 years. He expressed regret for John's passing and again apologized to all of John's loved ones. The trial dragged on because the defendants kept changing their statements about whether they killed John or not. Amanda, unable to bear the long trial, made a deal with investigators. In return, she was assured that she would be charged with involuntary manslaughter at her next trial. Larry then gave another speech. He said, "The four of us bought the ingredients to make illegal drugs. Amanda came to me and shared her wish to get revenge on John. The reality is that John, while high on drugs, assaulted Anna Marie, which led to her becoming pregnant. For me, I needed to regain my daughter's trust after years apart. I felt I could not refuse their demands. I often blamed myself for what had happened and thought about ending my life. But I wondered, why should I suffer when this crime was committed by them?" After Larry's speech, it was John's family's turn to speak. John's mother cried uncontrollably and could not express her emotions. She expressed, "Even if one day I can forgive the McClure family, I will never forget what they did. I also hope I live long enough to see one of them die before me." Next, John's children spoke, cursing the killers and declaring that they would never forgive them. The judge delivered the final verdict, sentencing Larry McClure to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the sentence for Amanda was revealed, her adoptive parents regretted telling her that her biological father was looking for her. They had always raised her with the freedom to make her own choices, unaware that this freedom could lead to such dire consequences. At the time the verdict was announced, Amanda stated that her father's jealousy was the root cause of the situation. Her adoptive parents pleaded with the judge to consider that Amanda's involvement in the crime was heavily influenced by Larry's negative impact, asserting that she would never have committed such a violent act otherwise. However, the prosecutors argued that the murder was a planned act, suggesting that Amanda and Larry were conspiring to be together as a couple. The initial hearing focused on Amanda, who was sentenced to 40 years. The judge said Amanda could serve only 20 years. During Anna Marie's sentencing, she attempted to speak out against John's murder. However, she felt pressured by her father and sister to do what they wanted, and she only attended Larry and Amanda's wedding out of concern for her own future. Ultimately, Anna Marie was sentenced to 40 years. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Lin family. Min Lin and Yun Lin's romance began in the late 1980s when they met at an Australian university. They both came from China and had moved to Australia to further their studies. Min had completed her bachelor's degree and was doing an internship, while Yun participated in a student exchange program. They met each other after meeting accidentally in the university hallway. After graduating, they got married and settled in North Epping, Sydney, where their love continued to grow into a strong, close-knit family. Min and Yun had their first child, Brenda Lin, in August 1994. She was mostly known as Brenda. Their son, Henry, was born in 1997, and their youngest child, Terry, was born in 2000. At the start of the 2000s, Min and Yun decided to start a business, opening a small newsroom. Through their hard work, it became a successful news agency with a publishing arm on Rose Street. The Lin family's business success had brought them economic security, a spacious house, a luxury car, and good education for their children. Min had handled business affairs, while Yun had focused on taking care of their home and children. Neighbors had respected the Lin family for their hard work and kindness. As parents, Min and Yun had been appreciated for their care and love for their children. They had never quarreled, their children had been very obedient and close-knit. Brenda, the eldest daughter, had stood out for her beauty, good academic performance, and kindness towards animals. Henry and Terry, two sons, had been both active and loved sports, especially soccer. As the Lin family had settled into life in Australia and their assets had increased, they had begun bringing relatives from China to live with them. In the early 2000s, Min's parents had been the first to move to North Epping and had helped with childcare. A few years later, Yun's parents also moved to Sydney suburb, with Min and Yun buying them a small house. Yun's sister, Irene, came to live with the Lin family, assisting with household chores and the children. By this time, the Lin family business was generating substantial income, reportedly nearing $1 million annually. In late 2007, Min Lin's younger sister, Kathy, and her husband, Robert, moved to Australia in search of better opportunities. They had visited before and briefly lived in Melbourne but had returned to China. This time, they were determined to settle in Australia for good. Robert was a former successful ear, nose, and throat doctor in China, decided to try his hand at entrepreneurship. He and his wife invested all their savings in a restaurant in Sydney, but the business struggled and eventually closed. Robert's subsequent attempts to open a cafe or snack bar also failed due to his lack of business skills and financial management experience. Lin's family had a habit of meeting every Friday night. Their last family gathering took place on July 17, 2009, at Kathy and Min's parents' home. The next morning, July 18, the Lin family's store had not been open, making longtime customers feel surprised and confused. This sudden closure had raised their concerns. One of them tried to contact Min multiple times but was unsuccessful, so they called Min's sister Kathy to see if she knew what was going on. Kathy was surprised and worried because her brother never closed the shop without making arrangements first. Kathy tried to call Min and Yun, but they didn't answer. She also tried calling their home phone, but no one picked up. Kathy and her husband Robert were worried, so they decided to visit Min's house to make sure everything was okay. They arrived around 9 a.m. and saw the family car. They went to the house. The front door was unlocked, but there was no sign of Min or his family inside. Kathy went upstairs. When she opened the bedroom door, she was shocked by what she saw. The room was covered in blood, including the floor, walls, ceiling, furniture, and curtains. Yun Lin's body was on the floor near the bed, and she had been severely mutilated. Kathy screamed and stumbled backward, was shocked by the gruesome scene. In the room next to where Irene slept, a terrible scene took place. Irene lay motionless on the bed, her face beaten and bruised. The bedrooms of Henry, 12, and Terry, 9, also revealed horrifying scenes. Both were brutally beaten to death. Their bodies were found in separate corners of the room. Min Lin's body was found in his bedroom, covered with a blanket soaked in blood. He was killed in the same way as his family. It seems he was the first victim, followed by his wife, her sister, and then the two boys. Kathy immediately contacted emergency services. After Kathy's urgent call, Robert left to fetch the Lin's parents, who lived about 10 kilometers from the crime scene. Police and paramedics arrived quickly, encountering what they described as one of the most horrific crime scenes they had witnessed. Tragically, the Lin family members were all killed. Each person died from multiple blows to the head with a heavy blunt object similar to a hammer. However, the crime weapon was not found at the scene. The initial examination of the crime scene did not reveal any important clues. The killer did not leave the murder weapon behind, and they did not take any valuables or money. This suggests that the main goal was to kill the Lin family, not to steal from them. At first, investigators thought there might be multiple attackers because it seemed unlikely that one person could overpower so many people. However, evidence showed that the children were awake during the attack and tried to escape. There were blood stains and splatters throughout the house. Oddly, all adult victims had head injuries and showed signs of strangulation. Investigators found identical bloody shoe prints in each room with a tread pattern. Although they could not identify the shoe brand, they determined the shoe size. No fingerprints were found, suggesting the killers wore gloves. Initially, the police had no leads or theories about the perpetrator's identity. Friends and neighbors of the Lin family all said that the family had no known enemies, making the motive for the brutal massacre unclear. The attack occurred between midnight and 3 a.m. on July 18th. Brenda Lin, the eldest child and now sole survivor of the Lin family, was attending school in New Caledonia at the time of the tragedy. She learned about the incident through social media and initially did not believe it was related to her family, but the truth devastated her. Brenda soon received a call from her Aunt Kathy, who tearfully confirmed the devastating news. Brenda was immediately flown back to Sydney, where Kathy and Robert met her at the airport. She then moved in with them, as her family's home was closed off as a crime scene. The following day, Brenda was taken to the police station, overcome with grief, to be questioned. However, she had no new information to share, stressing that her family had no enemies and hadn't noticed anything unusual before her trip. After her family's passing, Brenda inherited a significant fortune, including property and the family business. Since she was still a minor and in school, her guardians, Kathy and Robert, took on the responsibility of managing the estate. Brenda's grandparents offered their support, but Kathy and Robert insisted on being her caregivers. Robert even threatened to take legal action if the grandparents sought custody, claiming they were too old to care for a teenager. The matter was eventually resolved, with Brenda remaining in the care of her aunt and uncle. The Lin's shop and publishing business reopened under new management after a temporary closure. However, Brenda had not yet taken over the business operations. Robert began reviewing the family's financial records, including bank accounts, savings, and real estate. Beside that, experts thoroughly investigated the crime scene, documenting every detail, but no concrete leads were found. They believed the killer acted alone and entered the house quietly, possibly through and with a key. The killer wore size 9.5 shoes with a distinctive tread pattern and likely used a hammer as the lethal weapon, which was never found. The killer wore gloves, leaving no fingerprints or foreign DNA behind. One notable detail was the presence of blood stains on the doorknobs of each bedroom where the killings occurred, indicating the killer's bloodied gloves had touched them. However, there were no blood stains on Brenda's room doorknob, suggesting the killer knew she was not present. The Lin family tragedy received extensive media coverage. However, with no concrete evidence or suspects, numerous implausible theories surfaced. Speculation about the family's supposed vast wealth leading to their murder. As the investigation had stalled, no suspects had emerged for the probe. The theory of a robbery had eventually been abandoned because the killer had left money and valuables intact, suggesting the sole motive had been to kill family members. Furthermore, the fact that the house had lost power on the night of the murder suggested that the murderer had been someone who was familiar with the location of the electrical panel. The attacker's ability to control the house in darkness showed that he had prior knowledge of the house's layout. When reviewing the case, an investigator replayed Kathy's emergency call looking for missed clues. An important hint was detected in the recording. The recording captured Kathy's frantic attempts to explain the situation, her words interrupted by crying and sobbing. At the end of the call, Kathy mentioned her husband's name and talked to him in Cantonese. This piqued the investigators' interest, causing them to translate her words. The translation revealed that Kathy was pleading with Robert not to leave Kathy home alone. This was significant since Robert had left Kathy at the scene of the crime to pick up her parents, despite the potential danger. With 5 people brutally murdered and the killer possibly still inside, Robert's calm aroused suspicion, as if he already knew for certain that Kathy was safe. The police finally identified Robert as the main suspect. A crucial discovery was that Robert had a key to Min's house, which had been given to Robert shortly before the tragedy. However, Robert never mentioned this during questioning, and his wife Kathy was unaware that Min had given him the key. It was Brenda who unintentionally revealed this important information to investigators. Further investigation showed that Robert's claim of being a successful ear, nose, and throat doctor was false. Although he had a medical degree, he had never had a stable job in the field. There were rumors that he had fled to Australia to avoid punishment for alleged bribery charges in China. In Australia, Robert failed to establish a successful career and wasted his remaining savings on unsuccessful business ventures. After moving to North Keeping, he became idle, relying on his wife's income. Once the guardianship papers for Brenda were finalized, Robert acted as if he had inherited the Lin family's estate. His first move was to force Yun's parents out of their home, which Min had bought for them. Although the house remained in Min's name, Min and Kathy's parents were still allowed to stay in their own home that was also purchased for them. Based on this information, investigators suspected he had a long-standing plot to usurp Min family property, money, and profitable business. However, the police could not arrest Robert yet due to a lack of concrete evidence. Through a combination of interrogation, surveillance, and other methods, the investigation team was granted permission to install hidden cameras in the Robert household. They hoped to gather the evidence needed to prove Robert's guilt. The breakthrough came sooner than expected, starting with an unexpected revelation from Kathy during an interrogation. Kathy mentioned Robert's preference for a specific brand of shoes. A few years ago, Robert bought 2 pairs of limited edition sneakers that he really liked. He had worn out one pair and thrown it away, but kept the other pair at home. What's important to note is that Robert's shoe size, 9.5, matched the size of the shoes worn by the killers. The crucial evidence was caught on a hidden camera, which showed Robert deliberately destroying the box that held the remaining pair of shoes. A search warrant was issued for Robert's home. During the search, police found a new pair of size 9.5 sneakers with the same pattern as the pattern collected at the crime scene. In the garage, they discovered a small bloodstain, which was later confirmed by a forensic examiner to be a bloodstain containing DNA from all 5 victims of the Lin family, linking it to the crime scene. In May 2011, 2 years after the tragedy, Robert was officially arrested. He denied involvement, claiming the blood stains in his garage appeared after returning from Lin's house following the tragedy. He also downplayed the importance of the sneakers, saying they were new and he threw away the old shoes. While in prison awaiting trial, Robert shared a cell with a number of informants whom the police had arranged. During a conversation, he confessed to carefully planning the crime and covering his tracks. He bought the weapon in a store without surveillance cameras and gave his wife tea so she wouldn't wake up while he was committing the crime. He removed the hammer, shoes, gloves, and clothes so police would never find them. At trial, Robert denied everything. The only evidence against him is what the informant said and some indirectly clues. The jury failed to find Robert guilty and he was released on bail in December 2015. But when the trial resumed in June 2016, another informant said Robert had confessed to being haunted by Brenda since she was 13 years old. Brenda was questioned again and tearfully said Robert forced her to have sex when she first moved in. She kept silent about the abuse for years because she was afraid of what Robert might do. With this new information and other evidence, Robert was officially convicted of all charges. He was given 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 1 for each murder. All of his appeals were rejected. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sharon Collins. On Sept 26, 2006, police were alerted to a break-in at a business in Westgate Business Park, Ennis, Eau Claire. The office belonged to Downs and Howard, a property investment firm owned by Howard Howard and his sons. He was believed to be wealthy. The police received a call about a robbery in rural Ireland, which unfortunately was not uncommon. However, upon arrival, they found the crime scene to be unusual. There were no signs of forced entry, such as broken doors or windows. The office locks had been opened with keys, and the alarm had been deactivated with a code the previous night at 9:24 p.m. Stolen items included a laptop, a desktop computer CPU, computer cables, and an old Irish money poster. Strangely, the safe in the office was left untouched, adding to the mystery. Later that evening, the police got a call from Robert Howard, one of Howard's sons, reporting that a strange man had shown up at his house and demanded money. What began as a basic robbery call was now unraveling into an unusual and bizarre story in Irish criminal history. Just days after the robbery, a suspect, Robert, who was an Egyptian national living in Las Vegas, was arrested in Ennis, along with his wife, Theresa Engel, an American. Robert claimed that a man named Tony came to his house, demanded money, and threatened his life, as well as the lives of his father and brother. Tony said the hit could be called off if Robert paid €100,000. Robert refused, called the police, and Tony was taken into custody. On February 26, 2007, Sharon Collins, Howard's partner and purported surrogate mother to his 2 adult sons, was arrested. This was based on information found on 2 gateway computers discovered during an FBI investigation into Tony. The computers revealed a series of emails between 2 individuals, with one person using the email address lyingeyes98@yahoo.ie to arrange the contract killing of the Howard men. The emails also mentioned a FedEx package sent to a Las Vegas address with a down payment of €15,000 for the hit. Upon investigation, it was found that Sharon had indeed withdrawn €15,000 from her credit union and bank accounts. Sharon completely denies having any contact with Tony. She acknowledged sending the money, but claimed it was due to blackmail, possibly by a woman whom she met online. Howard Howard wrote to the DPP requesting no charges against Sharon, asserting she wasn't involved in the murder plot. Several individuals, including Sharon Collins, contacted the DPP about the case. Sharon wrote to them 3 times, detailing her case. She detailed her life, explaining how she got married at 19 and had 2 sons before separating and eventually getting divorced. In November 1998, she met Howard Howard, and they moved in with her 2 sons before Christmas. This worried me because they lived together like a married couple, but were never officially married, because Howard was worried about his sons inheriting his business and fortune. In Ireland, a spouse is entitled to 1/3 of an estate, regardless of a will. Sharon was pressuring Howard to have a church wedding due to her previous marriage being annulled and Howard being a widower. They were advised that this could lead to a claim on Howard's estate. Instead, they settled for exchanging vows in a church in Italy, signing a document acknowledging it was not a legal marriage. Despite this, they acted as a married couple and held a reception party when they returned home. Sharon misled guests into thinking they were legally married. Howard and Sharon generally got along well, but they had strong personalities and often disagreed. In December 2005, Sharon mentioned meeting a woman named Maria Marconi online. Sharon confided in Maria about the arguments in her relationship with Howard. The 2 of them first connected when Sharon filled out a form online regarding working from home. Among many other emails, one in particular caught her attention: an invitation from a popular author to help her write a novel. Sharon filled out the form and returned it. Not long after, Maria Marconi contacted her, offering to mentor her. Over time, Sharon and Maria became friends, and Sharon started sharing more personal details with her. Sharon mentioned she hadn't informed Howard about Maria, as she wanted to wait and see how things progressed before bringing up her book project. During this period, she found the writing exercises helpful and therapeutic. Sharon wrote in a letter to the DPP, that in April 2006, she and Howard had a disagreement, leading her to send an email to Maria where she expressed her anger towards Howard by calling him names and stating that she hated him. Sharon met Maria Marconi in June 2007 during a holiday in Ireland. Maria was a woman in her late 40s with straight brown hair, sallow skin, and about average height. They traveled around Clare together, and Maria used a computer in Howard's office at Ballyback House. The next month, Maria contacted Sharon to inform her that her house had been robbed and her laptop stolen. Following this incident, Sharon started receiving strange emails from a man threatening to harm Howard and his sons for money or if she didn't pay. The man knew personal details about her life, which frightened Sharon. She was then told to give €20,000 to prevent the letter to Maria Marconi from being sent to Howard. She received phone calls and emails asking for the money, so she decided to send it in hopes of solving the issue. The night after sending the money, on August 16, 2007, she traveled to Spain thinking it was all over. However, she continued to receive demands for more money through phone calls and emails. She visited an internet cafe to contact Maria, but upon logging in, she realized all her emails and contacts were gone. Upon learning that Howard's office had been burglarized and the computers were stolen, she remembered that her password was saved on one of the computers, suspecting that's how her emails were deleted. She told the DPP also that when she had been brought in to speak to the police, they had read emails that they said were from her to a man named Tony. She told them she recognized parts of the emails and that some of what she had written to Maria might have been lifted word for word and had been added to make it look like Sharon herself was conspiring to have the Howard men murdered. Sharon's next two letters were much shorter compared to her previous ones. In those letters, she mentioned that she would not have used her real name, her personal computer, or the computer at Howard's office. Sharon believed that all these factors made it impossible for her to have committed the crime. She admitted that she was foolish, deceived, and manipulated. In hindsight, she realized that she should have confessed much earlier and told the truth. Sharon regretted not informing Howard about the incident when it occurred. She also said that she had nothing to gain from the Howard's murders. She was not properly named nanny and would not have had any claim on Howard's estate since they were not married. In fact, if anything, Howard's death would mean that her source of income would be gone. She pleaded with the DPP not to press charges and to trust that she had acted foolishly but had not intended to kill. The DPP did not heed Howard or Sharon's advice. On June 26, 2007, the district court proceedings began. This court convenes 9 times a year, but today it was packed with photographers and journalists. Sharon, aged 44, was scheduled to appear in court. Additionally, it was reported that an Egyptian national residing in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA, was also present in court. He had been accused of attempting to extort €100,000, robbery, and dealing with stolen goods. However, those charges were dismissed in the morning. Upon leaving the courtroom, he was promptly rearrested for conspiracy to commit murder. Tony was taken by the police to Kilkee to face these charges alongside Sharon. Both were brought before the court and formally charged with conspiring to kill Howard and his 2 sons, Robert and Niall. It's worth noting that each of the accused were granted free legal aid, and so the cost of the case was falling on the state, which in turn cost the taxpayer. So with 12 solicitors, the accused, police involved in the case, family members and press, the courtroom was packed to the gills, and the judge was not a happy guys. So the following week, the case has moved to a much bigger venue. Sharon faced 3 charges of conspiracy to murder and faced another 3 charges of soliciting Tony to murder the 3 men. Tony was recharged with making an unwarranted demand for €100,000 from Robert Howard, trespassing at the Howard's business premises, theft, and handling stolen goods. The 2 of them pleaded not guilty to each of the charges. The jury learned that the investigating officers had collected a lot of information and evidence, with help from the FBI in the United States, while they were investigating Tony for similar charges. According to the prosecution, Tony, also known as Tony Luciano, was asked by Sharon to kill the Howard men. Sharon had also obtained a proxy marriage certificate from Mexico for herself and Howard, which she paid €1,000 for, without Howard's knowledge. She used this to apply for and receive an Irish passport in the name of Sharon Howard. Sharon had posted the keys to the Harrods' business offices to Tony, and he used these to gain access and steal the computers that had evidence of Sharon's contact with him, along with the keys she sent him, photographs, and money. Robert had gone to the offices of his family business and noticed that the door was unlocked and the alarm was no longer set. He saw that 2 computers were missing. Later that night, around 10:30 p.m., he received a phone call at home from a man he didn't know who said he had heard that Robert lost a few computers. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the door, and when Robert opened it, he found a man calling himself Tony who had one of the computers. Robert took the computer into the house and informed his brother Niall, who was also indoors, to contact the police. After coming back to the front door where Tony was waiting, Tony revealed that he had been hired to harm Robert, Niall, and their father Howard for €130,000, but he refused to comply. Tony proposed to cancel the contract for €100,000, which the Howard family agreed to pay. Tony showed Robert photographs of the Howards and a piece of paper with various directions to their houses. Robert was a little freaked, hoping the police would arrive soon before Tony tried to leave, which he did. Robert ended up following Tony, but lost him at the crossroads. Later, at around 12:30 a.m., Robert received another phone call from Tony, asking if he had started to get the money together, and there were several other calls the next day along the same lines. They made plans to meet at a hotel in Ennis for Robert to hand over the money, and Robert told the police about this. On the evening of the 27th of September 2006, Robert went to the hotel bar. He got another call telling him to meet a woman near the hotel bathrooms, as she would be collecting the money from him. This woman was Teresa, Tony's wife. When he got to the bathrooms, a woman asked him if he had the envelope, and just then, a plainclothes police passed them, and the woman took off without the money. The undercover female police followed Teresa, and she was seen talking to a man outside the hotel. They both went their separate ways, and the man headed to a pub across the road from the hotel. The police approached the man and arrested him there and then. This man was Tony. Teresa was arrested in the hotel car park. Howard supported Sharon during the investigation, arrest, and trial. On the stand, he expressed confusion as to why Sharon would be involved, stating she was not a greedy person and had never asked him for anything. He mentioned that shortly after the office break-in, Sharon informed him she was being blackmailed by Maria Marconi. Howard explained that he had asked Sharon to go to Las Vegas in order to hire a private investigator to locate Maria Marconi, but she was not successful in doing so. He also mentioned that he did not book the 2 flights from Las Vegas to Shannon Airport that were charged to his American Express credit card, which coincided with flights taken by Tony and Teresa. Howard revealed that Sharon had his credit card information and took care of the payments. But unfortunately, her purse containing the details was stolen in Spain, either in August or September of 2006. He suspected that the thief was Teresa. After Howard finished his testimony, he left the stand and crossed the courtroom, where he gave Sharon a kiss on the lips. This caused a sensation amongst the media. He then left the courtroom and did not attend the rest of the trial. On Thursday, the 12th of June, Teresa Engel took to the stand, and it was established that she had been granted immunity for her testimony. They went through her background, and she had met Tony in 2003 or 2004 at a casino in Detroit, near where she lived at the time. In June 2006, she moved to Las Vegas to live with Tony, and they got married. She, Tony, and another woman named Lisa all lived together. Lisa was Tony's first wife. Teresa mentioned that she had visited Ireland before, saying Tony had sent her there in response to emails he received from a woman seeking 3 men to be killed. She remembered receiving a cash payment of €15,000 delivered by FedEx. In Ireland, she met Tony's friend Ash in Ennis, who was supposed to poison the alcohol in Howard's office to kill the Howard sons. However, Ash ultimately decided not to go through with the plan and left. When the FBI were investigating Tony over fraud and extortion in the States, they had found evidence of the manufacturing of racing in the house that he lived in, and so this information was given in court in Ireland. The fraud and extortion in this case in the US was similar to the one in Ireland involving Sharon. Teresa had told a woman that her partner's ex had taken out a hit on her and that she'd be killed if she didn't send it $20,000. Obviously, rather than pay out the money to these people, she went to the cops. It turned out the ex-girlfriend had paid out $17,000 after finding Tony on the hitman for her website that he had set up. Teresa pleaded guilty and was eventually in 2008 sentenced to 8 months in prison. The next part of this story is another humdinger, as it involves the popular radio show personality Jerry Ryan, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but anyone Irish would have known him, and the producer of his show, Siobhan Hoff. You see, our Sharon had wrote an email to the show outlining her relationship with Howard. This email was only partially recovered, and so they brought Jerry Ryan and Siobhan Hoff to the stand, but they stated they'd get over 2,000 emails a month, and neither of them remember seeing the email. The email stated that Howard visited prostitutes, as well as individuals Sharon referred to as transvestites. He asked her to engage in sexual activity that made her uncomfortable. Sharon mentioned that he had awful moods when he didn't get his way, and she could no longer tolerate it, although she was afraid to leave. Personally, I believe she was hesitant to abandon the lifestyle to which she was accustomed, but I may just be cynical. She mentioned in her letter to the show that she wanted to create a situation where she could end her current relationship. The email suggested 2 possibilities. Either Sharon was truly unhappy in her relationship, giving her a possible motive for murder, or she was lying and willing to tarnish her partner's reputation to gain sympathy. Maybe Sharon was hiding her true self. The prosecution argued during their closing statement that bringing in Jerry Ryan was unnecessary and irrelevant, claiming it was just a ploy by Sharon to attract more attention. On the 1st of July, the day had finally come that everyone had been waiting on. Sharon was the next up in the witness box. Next up was the prosecution to cross-examine Sharon. Everything that was put to her was denied, including how she organized the break-in at the Howard's office, how she paid the down payment of €15,000 for the hit, and claiming it was the money to pay the blackmailer, and how the Lying Eyes 98 email address didn't belong to her. She was accused of making up the person Maria Marconi to cover her tracks. She claimed that the phone calls she exchanged were with the woman and not a man. Sharon remained cool and collected during the cross-examination. She made sure to smile at the jury and played the part of an innocent person. However, the next day, Sharon was a different woman in the court. She appeared drawn and lacked the confidence she had shown the previous day. The prosecution grilled her and went through her actions in detail. Sharon was unable to give clear explanations regarding the communication between the Lying Eyes account and the hitman, followed by a quick switch to her personal email from the same computer. She also could not clarify the searches on her laptop at Ballabeg House regarding inheritance, mortgages, and women's aid. Additionally, she had no explanation for the €15,000 tracking number used right after interactions between the Lying Eyes 98 and the hitman account. The defense argued that the police were biased in their investigation and only looked for evidence to make Sharon appear guilty. They mentioned phone data and records that were never thoroughly examined, which could have shown that someone else was in the house while Sharon and Howard were away. After the judge summed up the case, the jury deliberated for hours. Each counsel had requests for the judge. The jury spoke on the case and were retired to a hotel, The next day, the judge recharged the jury and deliberations continued. On the third day, finally, a decision was made. Early afternoon, the jury filed into the courtroom and delivered their verdict on 7 charges. Sharon had been found guilty of 3 charges relating to the soliciting the murder of the 3 men, Howard, Robert, and Niall. She had also been found guilty of charges relating to demanding €100,000 from Robert to cancel the contract of killing all 3 of them, but not guilty of the robbery of the Howard offices. Sharon broke down in tears as the jury returned to deliberate further on the outstanding charges. By 3 p.m., the jury returned and found her guilty of the conspiracy to murder counts. By 6 p.m., they returned and ultimately could not reach a decision regarding the guilt or innocence of Tony on those counts. Both were remanded in custody to await sentencing, and for the first time, Sharon was going to spend time in prison. On Monday, November 5th, Sharon and Tony went to court for sentencing. Sharon maintained her innocence as she faced the judge again. Howard also spoke to the judge, saying he still supported Sharon and didn't think she could have planned to kill him. It was taken into account that Sharon had no previous record, but obviously, it wasn't taken into account that she'd never admitted to her guilt when sentencing. She was sentenced to 6 years in total and would serve 4 years and 9 months. Tony was sentenced to 6 years in total also, and took his sentencing all in his stride. I suppose compared to US prisons, ours are like a holiday camp. It was backdated to 2006. Howard expended nearly €200,000 on a private detective in an attempt to obtain fresh evidence for Sharon's appeal, but it was unsuccessful. Sharon was eventually set free in September 2012, and in 2015, she granted an interview to the Irish Independent newspaper after relocating to Belfast, Northern Ireland. Throughout, she continued to assert her innocence and contemplated writing a book to share her perspective, but ultimately opted for a low-key lifestyle, aspiring to lead a peaceful existence. During her time in prison, she obtained certification in sports massage therapy and now works as a professional dog walker. She only intended to stay in Belfast for a short while, but she made such good friends up there that she decided to stay. Howard stood by her all the time she was in prison, but after she got out, the relationship fizzled out, and they both went their own way. Howard went to Spain to recover, and to this day spends most of his time there, while his 2 sons still manage a thriving business despite everything that went on. In 2016, Eve gave an interview to the Sunday World newspaper. He returned to his native Egypt, where he is now a cattle farmer, and had some harsh words for Sharon. He spoke of her statement that everyone deserves a second chance, saying that applies only to people who admit what they did wrong. Tony was extradited back to the States while in custody, as he faced charges of extortion. Once he had served his time in the US, he attempted to put his life back together. He did become ill, and after no one came to visit him in the hospital, he realized his life in the US was over after spending 32 years there, and he returned to his native Egypt. It's hard to believe that Sharon fell for the scam. She would have considered herself as intelligent and a computer expert, having taken a course in 1982. However, the computers of 2006 were a different ballgame. Metadata, cell data, browsing history, and so on were just about to become mainstream. Nowadays, we nearly all know that data is kept and our every movement can be traced, and yet we still have people who make these mistakes and leave a treasure trove of evidence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of the Harvey family. On that Sunday afternoon in January 2006, a man and his daughter visited his friend's family home for a New Year's gathering. He found the open door, a usual party thing. Entering, he saw thick smoke, alerted others, and called the authorities. Firefighters arrived, put out the fire, but tragically found the Harveys' lifeless bodies. What seemed like a fire turned into a murder investigation, leaving the investigators both shaken and perplexed. 49-year-old Brian Taba Harvey, a local icon, gained recognition in the 1980s as the singer-songwriter for the underground indie band House of Freaks. Despite parting ways professionally with his musical partner, Johnny Hott, in the 90s, they remained close friends. Brian, a devoted musician, took the stage for the last time at a New Year's Eve show, which was sadly, and unbeknownst to him, the final night of his life. On the other hand, 39-year-old Catherine Elizabeth Grabinski achieved success as the co-owner of the popular toy store World of Mirth, located in Richmond's Carytown district. A community pillar, she was an artist involved in various endeavors, from painting sets for community theater to working as a pastry chef and waitress. Catherine had an older sister, Shelley Grabinski, and was also the half-sister of actor Stephen Culp, known for his roles in The West Wing and Desperate Housewives, among other films. The paths of Brian and Catherine crossed at the Border Cafe on Main Street, where Catherine worked, and Brian frequently visited with Johnny. In 1990, they got married, and the House of Freaks released an album featuring a song dedicated to Catherine titled, "I Got Happy." The couple welcomed 2 daughters into their lives, Stella Ann, their first daughter, born in 1996, and Ruby May, born in 2001. While Brian continued his musical pursuits, he also took on a job working on computers for the Henrico County school system. Catherine, on the other hand, embarked on the entrepreneurial path by opening World of Mirth, a unique toy and gift store that became a cornerstone in the fashionable Carytown neighborhood. Her brother, Stephen Culp, explained in court that she wanted to create a space where parents could come with their kids and spend time, and kids could play with the toys, without any toys that resembled weapons such as guns or swords. The Harvey family established their home in a stately old neighborhood on the south side of Richmond, with large trees, porch swings, and ivy-covered surroundings. They had a family room in the basement of their 2-story red brick house. The beautiful family was well known and beloved in the community of Richmond, and no one really had bad intentions towards them, or so everyone thought. On New Year's Day, Sunday 2006, Brian, his wife Catherine, and their 2 daughters, 9-year-old Stella and 4-year-old Ruby, anticipated a bustling day ahead. Their plans included hosting a lunchtime barbecue for friends and family, prompting them to rise early and make preparations for the upcoming festivities. It had become a tradition for them to throw a party every New Year's Day, gathering their extensive circle of friends for the occasion. On that Sunday morning, Brian went outside their residence in the fashionable Woodland Heights area of Richmond, Virginia, to retrieve the newspaper. Absorbed in the front page news, he returned indoors without locking the door. Since they lived in a relatively safe neighborhood, this wouldn't normally have been a cause for concern. Typically, they also didn't secure the door on party days, leaving it open for arriving friends. However, on this day, unbeknownst to Brian, opportunistic criminals were secretly lurking nearby. Catherine was busily preparing cookies in the kitchen for the anticipated guests who were expected to arrive shortly. Suddenly, she heard voices emanating from the living room. Assuming someone had arrived earlier than expected, she approached the living room, only to be confronted not by familiar faces, but by 2 unknown men. In the tense moments that followed, Brian, Catherine, and young Ruby were directed to go downstairs to the basement playroom. Stella, who had spent the previous night at a slumber party, had not yet joined them. Once the family was confined to the small space, the intruders used electrical cords and packing tape to restrain them, ensuring their cooperation to prevent any harm as the intruders proceeded to ransack the house. Around 10 a.m., a knock on the front door interrupted them. The apparent leader of the group released Catherine from her restraints and instructed her to deal with whoever was at the door. However, before allowing her to leave, he issued a stern warning. If she sought help or attempted to escape, her daughter and husband would be murdered, as the imminent arrival of Stella was threatened. A distressed Catherine found herself in a difficult dilemma. Answering the door would expose her daughter to the same danger as the rest of the family, while ignoring the persistent knocking could incur the wrath of the assailant, who clearly had the upper hand. Ultimately, she decided that cooperation was the most prudent choice, and with that decision, she opened the door. In an unexpected turn of events, Stella swiftly darted past Catherine and made her way directly to the playroom where the family usually spent a lot of time together. Acting quickly, Catherine intercepted her daughter's friend, preventing her from following. Karen Perkinson, the friend's mother, later recounted her surprise at Catherine's unusual behavior, which deviated from her typical exuberance. In response to Perkinson's inquiry about her well-being, Catherine, normally lively, claimed to be unwell and gestured with a circular motion to the side of her head, mimicking a gun, to indicate someone might be considered crazy, abruptly ending the conversation and shutting the door. This peculiar gesture would later trouble Perkinson, who wondered if Catherine was attempting to convey that Kathy was being monitored by the intruders, and could she have attempted an escape, potentially saving herself and Stella. However, the dilemma of leaving Brian and Ruby behind weighed heavily on Catherine's mind. Perkinson left, intending to return later for the party. With all 4 members of Harvey's family now inside the house, Catherine went back to the basement and found a terrified Stella, who had been securely tied up along with the rest of the family. As everyone lay bound and vulnerable, chaos suddenly and unexpectedly erupted. The man in charge revealed a knife taken from the Harvey's kitchen and began slashing their throats, including those of the young girls, expressing frustration that they were not dying quickly enough. He ordered his accomplice to bludgeon their heads, but the partner refused, prompting the assailant to grab a claw hammer and ruthlessly strike them repeatedly until they stopped moving. After removing Catherine Harvey's wedding ring, the assailants used wine as an accelerant to set the room on fire and conceal evidence of their heinous acts. As they made their escape from the residence, they helped themselves to a plate of freshly baked cookies that were cooling on the kitchen counter and stole a laptop, DVD player, and various other items. Rushing out, they entered a getaway vehicle parked outside, where a woman who was in a relationship with one of the men was serving as a lookout during what was initially intended as a simple robbery. They quickly departed, leaving the scene as inconspicuously as they had arrived. Sometime later, around 1:30 p.m., Johnny Holt arrived for the celebratory gathering. Upon opening the front door, he was greeted by a dense cloud of smoke pouring out, alarmed by the strong smell of burning. He alerted the neighbors, who quickly called 911. As emergency responders entered the premises and dealt with the fire, they unfortunately found 4 bodies in the smoldering basement, still intact. Investigators at the scene soon determined that the fire did not cause the victims' deaths, but rather a more sinister cause of death was uncovered. This had now become a murder investigation. Police officers and paramedics, who were accustomed to witnessing the darkest aspects of humanity, were reportedly so distressed by the harrowing scene that some of them openly shed tears. The revelation that the parents had been forced to witness the brutal deaths of their children, and vice versa, was heartbreaking to imagine. Autopsies revealed that Brian and Catherine died from blunt force trauma to the head. Stella tragically succumbed to a combination of blunt force trauma and smoke inhalation, suggesting she was alive when the fire started, despite her severe injuries. Ruby's death resulted from stab wounds to her neck and back. Despite initiating an immediate investigation into the murders, the authorities had little evidence. Recognizing the potential for criminals to divulge information, they appealed to the public for assistance, and fortunately, their breakthrough came a few days later, on January 6th. A woman named LaToya Pye contacted the police, requesting them to perform a welfare check on her friend, 21-year-old Ashley Bazil. Pye expressed her concerns, as she believed that Ashley's boyfriend, 29-year-old Rye Joseph Dandridge, and his uncle, 29-year-old Ricky Javon Gray, were involved in the murder of the Harvey family. Ricky, who was slightly younger than his nephew by a few months, was said to be the one in charge. The shocking revelation continued as Pai disclosed that the two men had stored evidence of their crimes at her residence. She revealed that Gray and Dandridge had recently visited her home with a laptop that had an image of the Harveys as its wallpaper, and the Harvey case had by then received extensive coverage in the news, leaving no doubt that the laptop belonged to them. Additionally, LaToya provided detailed information about a plan devised by Ashley, Gray, and Dandridge to rob Ashley's parents. In this plan, Ashley was supposed to pretend to be a hostage, allowing Ricky and Gray to extort money from the Bazil Tuckers, which would make Ashley appear innocent, even though she was aware of the entire plan and had been offered a role. LaToya declined, becoming suspicious of the trio. The uncle and nephew were the only ones that returned hours later, and when asked about Ashley's whereabouts, they cryptically replied, "Ashley has gone bye-bye." This statement heightened LaToya's concerns, prompting her to contact the police. It was this crucial information that investigators needed to start connecting the dots. Having confirmed LaToya's information, investigators proceeded to the residence where Ashley resided with her mother, 46-year-old Mary Bazil Tucker, and stepfather, 55-year-old Purcell Tucker. To their horror, they encountered yet another gruesome scene. Upon entering the home, they discovered the lifeless bodies of all three victims who had been subjected to a brutal method similar to the Harvey family's fate. The victims were bound, gagged, and had their throats mercilessly slit. Duct tape wound tightly around their heads had inflicted additional suffering on Mary and Purcell, who both displayed deep neck lacerations. Purcell had a sock forcibly inserted into his throat, and Ashley tragically was found to have been suffocated with a plastic bag. The common cause of death for all three was determined to be suffocation and torture. Suspecting the presence of killers, law enforcement agencies from across the region collaborated in a joint effort to apprehend them before they could commit further atrocities. Harvey, Purcell, and Mary led quiet, peaceful lives without any known enemies. Purcell worked as a forklift operator, while Mary was employed by a housekeeping business. Their tranquil existence was shattered by the betrayal of their own daughter, which ultimately led to the tragic demise of an innocent couple who was simply trying to enjoy their retirement years. The investigators swiftly uncovered the crucial link between the Harvey and Tucker cases. Ashley was found wearing Brian Harvey's wedding band, the same one that was missing and taken from Catherine. With this revelation, urgent action was imperative to apprehend Gray and Dandridge before they could inflict further irreparable harm. They traced their movements back to their home state of Pennsylvania, and Gray and Dandridge were captured in Philadelphia on January 7th. In questioning, Dandridge asserted that the murders had been conceived by his uncle, and he had merely followed instructions. Faced with these incriminating accusations, Gray readily admitted to the killings of the Harveys and his involvement in those of Ashley and her parents. While these straightforward confessions were enough to leave anyone astounded, it became apparent that this was just the beginning. Gray provided gruesome, intricate details of both family massacres, emphasizing that their actions were driven solely by the need for money. During the Harvey family murders, unbeknownst to everyone, Gray was under the influence of PCP, a drug known for inducing auditory and visual hallucinations, as well as violent behavior. Throughout his confession, Gray maintained a chilling, emotionless stare, and his utter indifference towards the lives he took led investigators to believe they were face to face with the devil incarnate. It was also revealed that Gray was responsible for the murder of his wife, Trevor Terrell Gray, whose body was uncovered in a shallow grave on Brookside Avenue in Washington, Pennsylvania. The couple had been married for 6 months prior to her tragic murder and resided together in a house owned by Trevor's family along with Gray's nephew, Rarai. According to Trevor's parents, the Grays frequently engaged in bitter arguments, and claw marks on Rai's forearm were even discovered on the day Trevor's body was found. Despite being interviewed by Washington police, neither Gray nor Dandridge were initially considered suspects. Trevor's mother, Manna Squires, alleged that law enforcement assumed Trevor had succumbed to a drug overdose, leading to a lackadaisical investigation into her death. Although Trevor's demise was deemed suspicious at the time, a homicide investigation was only initiated after Gray's confession in 2006. On December 31, 2005, a brutal assault unfolded where 26-year-old Ryan K.Y. was attacked by two men in front of his parents' Arlington home, who were later identified as Gray and Dandridge. The assault left Kai with severe beating and stab wounds to the chest, neck, and arms, resulting in a near-fatal assault that caused him to spend the following 2 weeks in a coma and permanently lose the use of his right arm. On February 9, 2006, Ricky Gray faced 5 charges of capital murder, while Ray Dandridge was indicted on 3 counts of murder for his involvement in the Baskerville Tucker killings. Despite their earlier admissions, both men pleaded not guilty. After a 6-month trial, the jury found Gray guilty on all counts, leading to a life sentence for the murders of Brian and Catherine Harvey. In response to the brutal taking of Stella and Ruby's lives, the court deemed nothing less than a death sentence appropriate. In September 2006, following his uncle's conviction, and after learning the verdict in his case, Dandridge opted for a plea deal to evade the death penalty. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In December 2006, Ricky Gray faced charges from Chesterfield County for the murder of Cheryl Warner, a 37-year-old legal secretary and mother of 3. Warner was discovered shot and hanged by an electrical cord in the basement of her Burning Beaver residence. Gray entered a not guilty plea. However, on June 4, 2008, the charge was suspended due to conflicting evidence. Over the subsequent 9 years, Gray's legal team pursued numerous appeals, primarily arguing that their client suffered from diminished capacity due to an abusive childhood. The case reached the Supreme Court, where it was summarily rejected in 2016. In November 2016, Gray was scheduled to be executed on January 18, 2017. On January 18, 2017, with all of his appeals exhausted, Ricky Gray was executed by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center. Ray Dandridge remains incarcerated at Sussex State Prison. The brutal murders of the Harvey family unleashed an overwhelming wave of horror and sorrow, with over 1,400 individuals attending their memorial service, expressing their condolences and grief. Flowers and dolls piled up and formed a poignant tribute along the curb outside the red brick house. Children placed candles, which maintained their glow for weeks. A neighbor reflected on the community's collective mourning, stating that they kept those candles lit for weeks. Catherine's brother, Culp, testified about the profound impact of the murders, describing them as a lightning bolt to the heart that felt bottomless. He further expressed his pain in thinking about the Harvey family's last hours. In Richmond's Forest Hill Park, an entrance to a footbridge is adorned with a granite monument, a poignant dedication to the Harvey family. This family, who had previously enjoyed many joyful moments at the site, saw their lives abruptly and tragically cut short. A bronze plaque depicting their radiant smiles serves as a commemoration of happier days before the unfathomable evil infiltrated their lives, devastating everything in its wake. It is a sad and unfortunate tale. And our thoughts are with the victims, whose lives were tragically cut short, and the loved ones they left behind. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jolene Cummings. The disappearance of 33-year-old Jolene Cummings shocked even seasoned detectives. Jolene, a mother of 3, lived in Fernandina Beach and was going through a divorce from her husband Jason. While Jolene and their children resided in a Fernandina Beach house, Jason moved to a neighboring city and had weekend visitations with the kids. Jolene worked as a hairdresser at Tangle's Hair Salon. On Saturday, May 12, 2018, Jolene worked until 5 p.m. The next day, Mother's Day, was also her 34th birthday. Her children had spent the previous days with their father, As agreed, Jolene was to meet Jason on Sunday in Hilliard at the Winn-Dixie supermarket parking lot to pick up the children. Jason brought the kids, but Jolene failed to appear. All attempts to reach her by phone were unsuccessful. Her mother, Ann Johnson, who wanted to wish Jolene a happy birthday, couldn't contact her either, as all calls went straight to voicemail. After trying to reach Jolene to no avail, Jason contacted Ann to inquire about the children. Upon learning that Jolene hadn't picked up the kids, Ann grew concerned, as this behavior was unusual for her daughter. When Ann couldn't get in touch with Jolene on Monday, May 14th, she filed a missing person report with the police. The authorities promptly launched an investigation, releasing a poster with Jolene's photo and issuing an all-points bulletin for her 2006 Ford Expedition. Ann Johnson made a public plea for help in finding her daughter, urging anyone with information to come forward. Jolene's disappearance was devastating for Ann, and she begged anyone with knowledge to report it. On the same day, police and volunteers searched the forest near Jolene's home, but their efforts were unsuccessful. The salon where Jolene worked was closed on Sunday and Monday. The police discovered that Jolene was last seen on Saturday, May 12th, when she left work. According to the salon's owner, Jolene and Jennifer, another hairdresser, were scheduled to work together that day. In a phone call, Jennifer told her boss that she and Jolene closed the salon at 5 p.m. and each drove away in their own cars. The police determined that Jolene last used her phone to make an outgoing call while still at work on May 12th. Nassau County Sheriff Bill Leeper appealed to anyone who was a customer of Tangle's salon or in the area on May 12th to contact the police. Jolene's relatives and friends didn't think she was hiding on her own accord. The owner of the salon, where Jolene had worked for 6 years, shared their skepticism. It was hard for them to believe that she would abandon her children. The police were determined to uncover at least one lead, so they delved into Jolene's personal life. As spouses often become hostile during divorce and child custody disputes, they took a closer look at Jason. Meanwhile, detectives found that just 5 days before Jolene vanished, a neighbor had reported a loud argument to the police. It emerged that Jolene had been fighting with her ex-boyfriend, Jason G., and their children were witnesses to the altercation. He had asked Jolene if he could stay with her for a while, but she refused. Enraged, he began vandalizing everything in sight. The reason for her refusal was that the police were actively searching for Jason due to his parole violations. By the time the police arrived, Jason had managed to flee the scene. After Jolene disappeared, Jason G. became a person of interest in the police investigation. 2 days into the investigation, on May 15, 2018, the police found Jason G. hiding in Jolene's house, where he had been since the day Jolene's neighbor reported a loud quarrel to the police. He was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. During the conversation, Jason G. claimed he was not involved in Jolene's disappearance. Meanwhile, the police discovered their first crucial lead. They found Jolene Cummings's SUV parked outside a Home Depot hardware store, just a few miles from her workplace. The vehicle was undamaged and showed no signs of a struggle. On May 15th, the police visited the salon where Jolene worked, as it was the first working day after a 2-day break. They arrived at 10 a.m. to speak with Jennifer Seibert, an employee who claimed to be the last person to see Jolene and to have closed the salon with her before the weekend. However, Jennifer failed to show up for work, citing an urgent matter in another city. CCTV footage provided crucial clues about Jolene's disappearance. The footage revealed Jolene's car entering the parking lot of a hardware store, where the police later found it. Notably, Jennifer Seibert had stated that she and Jolene closed the salon at 5 p.m. on May 12th, but the CCTV footage showed Jolene's car arriving at the hardware store at 1:17 a.m. on May 13th, a time gap of 8 hours and 17 minutes. Jennifer visited a gas station across the street from her location. Surveillance footage from the station reveals that she entered the premises, purchased a bottle of water and requested an employee to call a taxi for her, which later took her to her workplace, a salon. The gas station employee reported to the police that Jennifer appeared agitated and had fresh facial abrasions. As a result, Jennifer Seibert became the primary suspect in the investigation, and the police launched a search for her. Upon verifying the address she provided when applying for her job, the detectives discovered it was fictitious. Jennifer attempted to evade capture, but her efforts were unsuccessful. On May 16th, patrol officers spotted a black Kia Soul belonging to Jennifer, parked in a recreation area between two trucks, approximately 50 meters from her salon. Upon approaching the vehicle, the officers found Jennifer asleep inside. They arrested her and initially charged her with stealing Jolene Cummings's car. When the police took her to the station, detectives noticed the abrasions on her hands and face and asked her to explain how she got them. She said she had been bitten by bed bugs. The police found out that she didn't have a permanent place to live, mostly sleeping in her car and using a shower at a fitness center. After her arrest, the investigators made a surprising discovery. Jennifer Seibert wasn't her real name. Her real name was Kimberly Kessler, born in 1968, and she had been reported missing in Pennsylvania in 2012. The name Jennifer Marie Seibert belonged to a 13-year-old girl who died in a car accident in Germany in 1987 and was buried in Butler Cemetery, Pennsylvania. During a videotaped interview 48 hours later, Kimberly Kessler, seated on a couch and wearing an orange jumpsuit, calmly revealed her true identity. "When you run my fingerprints, they'll come up as Kimberly Lee Kessler. I'm 50 years old, and I've been on the run for over 25 years." The police investigation into the case revealed more about Kimberly Kessler's past. It emerged that she had begun using other people's names in 1996 while living in Pennsylvania. Since then, Kessler had used at least 18 aliases and lived in 33 cities across 14 states. Many of these names were similar, and she had taken at least half of them from gravestones and cemeteries, later obtaining fake documents to support these identities. One of the identities she used was Jennifer Seibert. In 2012, Connie Kessler, Kimberly's mother, contacted the police to report her daughter missing, despite not having heard from her since 2004. This delay in reporting her daughter's disappearance, 8 years after losing contact, suggests that the family relationships were strained. The Pennsylvania police investigated Kimberly Kessler's disappearance and determined that she was voluntarily missing, but the reasoning behind this conclusion is unclear. It is unknown whether a further investigation was conducted. Had the police found her, they likely would have discovered that she had assumed someone else's identity. Several questions remain unanswered. Why did Kessler flee, and why did she use multiple aliases? According to Connie Kessler, her daughter faced numerous challenges, including an abusive relationship with a man in 2004. Kimberly gave birth to a son, Evan, but when the relationship ended, the father took custody and prohibited Kimberly from seeing her child. The father later relocated to another state and falsely told Kimberly that their 1-year-old son had passed away. Kimberly sought to uncover the truth and locate the grave of her son. Frustrated by the lack of answers, she began searching for Evan and investigating his fate. Connie Kessler theorizes that her daughter used aliases to conceal her identity, fearing Evan's father. According to Tim Edwards, Evan's father, the circumstances were different. He claims to have had a relationship with Melissa McKernan between 1997 and 1999, resulting in the birth of their son Evan. Melissa allegedly used fake names to keep her family, including her mother, from finding her. After the couple separated, Melissa retained custody of Evan, denying Tim visitation rights. In 1999, when Evan was around 15 months old, social services intervened, taking Evan away from Melissa, who then fled the city, disappearing from Tim's life. Tim never informed Kimberly that Evan had passed away since he lost contact with Melissa after she left, and never heard from her again. Later, when Jolene vanished, Evan was 20 years old, and had never seen a picture of his biological mother until FBI agents visited their home in 2018 to gather information about Kimberly Kessler's past. However, there are inconsistencies in these stories. According to Tim Edwards' birth certificate, Evan was born in 1998, but in her interview, Connie Kessler claimed Kimberly gave birth to Evan in 2004. This discrepancy suggests that Connie Kessler was not well informed about her daughter's life, and her statement about Tim hiding Evan from his mother may not be reliable. As a result, Connie's theory that her daughter used the identities of deceased individuals to find her son and avoid detection by his father is questionable. Moreover, Kimberly was unable to provide coherent reasons to the detectives about why she needed to use multiple names. Now, let's revisit the Jolene Cummings case. After uncovering the fact that Kimberly Kessler had been living under assumed identities, the police brought forgery charges against her. A storage unit rented by Kessler was searched, yielding several significant finds, including 4 wigs, a bag containing 2 severed hair tails, and 3 mobile phones. However, the most critical piece of evidence was the discovery of Jolene Cummings's DNA on Kessler's sock and shoe. Furthermore, during a search of Kessler's vehicle, the police found scissors with Jolene's DNA on them. Notably, the blue plastic containers found at the scene will prove to be important later on. The phone seized from Kessler revealed a disturbing search history. It suggested that what happened to Jolene Cummings was not an accident, but rather something Kessler had been preparing for. On April 30th, 2018, at 3:36 a.m., Kessler searched for information on a man who was charged with murder after his co-worker's remains were found in his yard. This was followed by a search on May 8th at 1:37 a.m. for cases where a co-worker was found guilty of murder, but the body was never found. Later that day, at 7:13 a.m., Kessler searched for advice on injecting and how to use a tourniquet. She also looked up a list of female murderers by country on a website called Murderpedia, as well as a list of female murderers in Florida. Finally, she searched for information on autopsy and post-mortem changes at 6:33 p.m. The owner of the hair salon where Jolene worked reported that the plant in the pot inside the salon had been replaced. This draws attention to Kessler's search queries on May 13th, the day Jolene failed to pick up her kids. At 12:05 p.m., Kessler searched for indoor palm and then variation palm tree. A minute later, at 12:06 p.m., the police examined CCTV footage from a hypermarket selling household goods, located a few hundred yards from the Tangles hair salon. The footage showed Kessler arriving at the hypermarket on May 14th at 2:39 p.m. and leaving the store half an hour later with a plant, which would later end up at the hair salon on May 15th at 6:13 p.m. 2 days later, on May 16th at 6:27 p.m., Kessler searched online for Jolene Cummings' "I Have Vanished" and "No Body, No Crime." Forensic experts used luminol and ultraviolet light to investigate the hair salon, and their findings suggested that a serious crime had taken place there. The entire room glowed under the ultraviolet light, indicating the presence of blood or other bodily fluids. On May 22nd, the sheriff held a press conference, during which he announced, "We have gathered sufficient evidence, although some of it will remain undisclosed for the time being to protect the ongoing investigation. Sadly, our evidence leads us to conclude that Jolene Cummings has likely died." The investigators learned that, about a week before her disappearance, Jolene shared her suspicions with a colleague at the Tangle salon. She thought their new hairdresser, Jennifer, was hiding something and wasn't being genuine. According to some salon clients, the relationship between Jolene and Jennifer was strained. One client even witnessed a heated argument between the two women on May 9th, just 3 days before Jolene vanished. The Tangle hair salon closed its doors on June 5th, 2018. Despite Kessler's attorneys managing to keep some evidence under wraps, the police released information sheds light on what happened to Jolene Cummings. However, a surveillance camera near the back of the building captured footage of the dumpster. Kessler was seen there at least 4 times. The recording shows Kessler doing something near the dumpster. Later, at 8:08 a.m., she returns to dispose of a white garbage bag. Based on how she lifts the bag, it appears to be quite heavy. 14 minutes later, she throws out another white bag. In the 4th recording, taken an hour before midnight, Kessler is seen lifting a waste container to empty its contents, suggesting that it holds something heavy. The Walmart camera footage provides insight into what Kessler threw away. The recording shows her purchasing items at the self-checkout, including garbage bags, cleaning agents, latex gloves, and notably, an electric knife. This discovery significantly impacted the police's subsequent actions. In July 2018, investigators discovered that a local waste management company had been dumping trash in a Georgia landfill. A team of nearly 200 people combed through the landfill for a week, yielding several crucial leads, although the sheriff refused to disclose them to protect the integrity of the investigation. Near the dumpster, where Kessler had discarded the white garbage bags, police recovered a piece of jewelry, women's shoes, and a blue plastic container. Notably, the container was identical to one found in Kessler's storage unit, and it tested positive for Jolene Cummings's DNA. While Jolene's body remained unfound, the accumulated evidence was sufficient to warrant Kessler's arrest for her murder. On January 17, 2019, Kimberly Kessler made her first court appearance, entering a not guilty plea. However, the trial was delayed for several years due to the judge's concerns about Kessler's mental stability. During this time, Kessler engaged in a hunger strike, which left her weighing under 88 pounds. Her court appearances were often marked by outbursts of anger. Before the 2021 court session, Kessler underwent compulsory treatment, which ultimately deemed her fit to stand trial. On December 9, 2021, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and on January 27, 2022, Kessler was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The prosecution believes Kessler's motive was to silence Jolene Cummings, who threatened to expose her lies during a press conference. Sheriff Leeper expressed satisfaction with the verdict, stating that Kessler would spend the rest of her life in Florida State Prison. Unfortunately, Jolene Cummings' body was never found. Before Paul met Joanne, he had been in serious relationships with women more than once. For example, in 1993, during his university years, he was with Carrie Thompson. Although he didn't stay with her for long, this relationship revealed his violent tendencies. Carrie told the police about how Paul could switch during an argument and become aggressive, beating the walls and holding Carrie by force. This was just the beginning. In 1999, Jenny Mary Clark appeared in his life. They wasted no time, and just 2 weeks after meeting, the wedding bells were already ringing. However, their marriage began with a real nightmare. On their wedding night, Paul attacked Jenny, and this was not a one-off incident. He continued to beat her and even strangled her into unconsciousness. Investigators claimed that this abusive behavior was repeated with Joanne. Despite this situation, Paul and Jenny decided to have a baby. Their daughter, Chloe, was born in 2000, and they divorced shortly after. When Chloe was 5 years old, Jenny met Joanne and immediately realized that Joanne was too naive for such a rude man and would face a tough battle with Paul. In 2002, he broke up with Jenny and began dating Joanne Nelson. Katie, Joanne's sister, said that Joanne most likely did not know about his criminal history. Otherwise, she would not have continued the relationship or wanted children with him. Their story began on the streets where Paul worked as a security guard in bars and clubs. He was 27 and already experienced in relationships, while Joanne was just starting her journey into adulthood at the age of 19. Despite the age difference, they found support in each other, running away from their parents' control and looking for their own space. At first, they lived with Paul's mother, and then they could afford to buy their own house. But happiness was slowly disappearing, fading away like smoke from a fire. The days turned gray, and the tension grew between them. For Joanne, everything had become too mundane and boring. Their differences began to affect the relationship. She loved order, while he did not give it much thought. On February 14, 2005, Joanne did not come to work. This was unusual and caused immediate concern. As the investigation revealed more and more information, the previously quiet and peaceful town was overtaken by a wave of shocking lies and deception. Joanne Nelson, a cheerful and bright young woman, always put the happiness of her loved ones above her own. As a child, she lived with her parents in the town of Hull, also known as Kingston upon Hull, on the east coast of Yorkshire, England. Her mother, Jean, was a teaching assistant, and her father, Charlie, worked as an engineer for the city council. It was in this town that Joanne grew up and became who she was. Joanne had a bright personality and was successful both academically and socially. She was an active athlete who loved netball, lacrosse, and swimming. She lived happily, enjoying her youth, but always harbored a deep desire to create her own family. She initially tried her hand at medicine, but the emotional toll of being a nurse proved too difficult for her. Her loved ones remember how she would come home saddened by the suffering of her patients. Later, Joanne considered working abroad, but ultimately chose to work at an employment center in Hull to be closer to her family and friends. She found fulfillment in making people's lives better by helping them find jobs and improve their skills. Joanne's dedication and kindness left a lasting impact on those around her, making her absence even more profound and alarming when she did not show up for work that fateful February day. On Valentine's Day 2005, Joanne Nelson vanished without a trace, turning a day meant for love into a day of horror and mystery. Her disappearance was a nightmare for her parents. When her boyfriend reported her missing to the police, a sense of foreboding filled the air. That night turned dark and ominous, leaving Joanne's family and friends enveloped in fear and uncertainty. Instead of enjoying the evening with his beloved, Paul found himself speaking with the police. He claimed that the last time he saw Joanne was when she was asleep, and upon his return from work, she was gone. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving only shadows of fear and hope behind. At 22 years old, Joanne's sudden disappearance caused great distress among her loved ones. The situation became even more perplexing when she missed significant events, such as her best friend's father's funeral and her sister Katie's 19th birthday. The police swiftly launched a large-scale search operation involving numerous law enforcement officers, military personnel, and volunteers. Joanne's father was vocal about his suspicions regarding Paul, questioning how he could be involved in the disappearance of such a responsible young woman. Katie, although aware of her father's concerns, found it hard to believe that Paul had any role in Joanne's vanishing. The family's worry and confusion only deepened as days turned into weeks without any sign of Joanne. Paul threw himself into the search efforts, collaborating with volunteers, concerned relatives, and friends. Despite lacking family consent, he granted multiple interviews to the press, keen to aid in the search. When questioned by a reporter over the phone, Paul vehemently denied any wrongdoing in Joanne's disappearance. He adamantly professed his love for her, asserting that he could never harm her. However, discrepancies emerged between his spoken words and his facial expressions. Expert Cliff Lansley scrutinized Paul's demeanor during a televised interview, identifying peculiarities. Notably, Paul failed to close his eyes while discussing Joanne, an anomaly for someone grappling with grief. Moreover, he displayed no signs of tears, raising suspicions. Further scrutiny came from Ray Higgins, the head of the investigation team at Humberside Police. Higgins reported observing nail marks on the back of Paul's hand, leading authorities to consider his potential involvement in Joanne's disappearance or death. Eventually, Paul's mother, unable to bear the emotional turmoil any longer, divulged crucial information about Paul's actions to the authorities, potentially shedding light on Joanne's fate. Upon learning of the accusations, Paul didn't attempt to refute his culpability. Just 6 days after Joanne's disappearance, he found himself in police custody. During a grueling interrogation, the truth emerged. On that fateful Valentine's Day in 2005, Paul committed the unthinkable act of ending Joanne's life in their own home. Paul recounted a tumultuous argument that escalated to irreparable heights. Joanne's constant criticism, particularly regarding household chores, served as the catalyst. According to Paul, Joanne's request for help with the washing machine triggered his anger and shame at his perceived inadequacy. Matters worsened when Joanne declared her intention to leave him and demanded the sale of their home for €110,000, further fueling Paul's rage. In a fit of fury, Paul confessed to the police, admitting to strangling Joanne with his bare hands. Subsequently, he displayed chilling composure as he meticulously orchestrated the aftermath, intending to conceal his heinous deed. He craftily devised a plan, seeking to fabricate Joanne's sudden disappearance. With calculated precision, Paul proceeded to carry out his scheme. He engaged in casual interactions with neighbors and discussed banal topics like acquiring a pet, all while concealing the darkness within him. Surveillance footage captured his unnervingly composed demeanor as he purchased supplies, a testament to his disturbingly calm facade. Armed with garbage bags, rubber gloves, and disinfectant spray, Paul executed his plan methodically. He bound Joanne's limbs, encased her in bags, and sealed them with duct tape. Then, without hesitation, he transported her lifeless body to her vehicle, his audacity matched only by the magnitude of his crime. The audacious act unfolded in broad daylight, revealing Paul's cunning and deceitful nature. With chilling composure, he concealed his heinous deed from unsuspecting onlookers, demonstrating his ability to manipulate those around him effortlessly. After concealing Joanne's lifeless body in her own vehicle, Paul embarked on a calculated journey. Driving approximately 75 miles to the remote Bradbury woodland near Winteringham in North Yorkshire, Paul carefully orchestrated each step. With meticulous precision, he carried Joanne's body through the dense forest, seeking a secluded burial site among the towering pines. Utilizing twigs to obscure the makeshift grave, Paul buried what he perceived as the love of his life. Returning to the victim's car, Paul resumed his facade of normalcy, showing no remorse or acknowledgement of his monstrous actions. He even fabricated a fake phone conversation with Joanne to divert suspicion, further highlighting his cold-blooded demeanor. Despite his attempts to deceive, Paul's consistent actions betrayed an alarming level of planning and premeditation. In the subsequent investigation, Paul's memory conveniently faltered regarding the exact location of Joanne's burial site. Detectives, led by the tenacious Ray Higgins, embarked on a painstaking 6-week search across 3 counties. Finally, on March 24th, after 39 days of agonizing uncertainty, the grim truth came to light. In a solemn operation led by Detective Phil Gadd, Joanne's remains were discovered in Bransby near York. Trembling with nerves, the search party followed Paul's descriptions until they stumbled upon the telltale signs, a garbage bag concealed beneath branches. Within it lay the heartbreaking evidence: Joanne's body, wrapped in plastic, a tragic confirmation of the family's worst fears. March 24th marked the end of a harrowing ordeal for Joanne's family, bringing closure to their anguished search while cementing the grim reality they had dreaded all along. Paul's facade of strength hid a dark history of sexual violence against women, a chilling truth kept hidden from Joanne's family and the public until the trial. During his time working as a security guard at the club, he ominously referred to himself as a psychopath, sending shivers down the spines of those who knew him. Witnesses familiar with Paul from the gym recounted instances where he instigated fights in clubs and bars, painting a disturbing picture of his character. As the trial unfolded, more unsettling details emerged. It was revealed that Paul had been experimenting with steroids in a misguided attempt to sculpt his physique into that of a bodybuilder. His friends disclosed that he had battled alcoholism in the past, and his violent outbursts were likely exacerbated by his steroid use. Paul's educational background provided little insight into the darkness lurking beneath his seemingly ordinary facade. He attended Sydney Smith School before enrolling at Hal College, where he successfully completed a program in constructional engineering. Despite his academic achievements, Paul's journey took a sinister turn when he pursued a degree in horticulture at Bishop Burton College, completing it at the tender age of 17. These revelations painted a chilling portrait of a man whose outward appearance belied the deep-seated demons lurking within. Paul's transformation from a seemingly ordinary student to a perpetrator of unspeakable violence left Joanne's family and the community reeling, grappling with the horrifying reality of the darkness that dwelled within him. Paul's journey through life took him from Saudi Arabia to Somerton Road, where he worked diligently in various industries alongside his father, Peter Dyson. Together, they navigated the maintenance industry, honed their gardening skills, and delved into the intricacies of machining. Paul's employment history painted a picture of a young man eager to carve out his path in the world of work. However, behind the veneer of normalcy lurked a disturbing truth. At the tender age of 15, Paul's life took a dark turn when he crossed paths with Colin Allen, a martial arts expert with whom he formed an unlikely bond. It was to Colin that Paul confessed to a heinous crime, a confession that ultimately led to his arrest. Paul's acquaintances shed light on his complex character. While some saw him as charming and attractive to women, others witnessed a more troubling side to his personality. He often leveraged his position as a security guard to forge connections with women from higher social echelons, revealing a distorted perception of himself and his interactions. Colleagues and relatives offered contrasting portraits of Paul, depicting him as both outspoken and boastful about his athletic prowess, yet also capable of making disturbing statements. Shockingly, Paul's family recounted instances where he proudly boasted about his father's involvement in the deaths of 2 individuals. This seemingly incredulous claim, however, proved to be rooted in reality. Paul's father, Peter Dyson, had indeed served time in prison for the manslaughter of 22-year-old John Dickinson, a man with whom his wife had been unfaithful. The tragic events of 1967 cast a shadow over Paul's upbringing, exposing him to the grim realities of life and death at a young age. Through Paul's tumultuous journey, a complex and unsettling portrait emerged, revealing the interplay between family history, personal choices, and the darkest depths of human nature. In 1974, a mere 2 days after Paul entered the world, tragedy struck with haunting consequences. Peter Dyson, his father, found himself entangled in a fatal accident. Behind the wheel, he collided with 47-year-old Gordon Kell, who was returning home after jubilantly celebrating a silver wedding anniversary. In a chilling turn of events, Peter fled the scene, leaving Gordon to perish on the roadside. Despite the gravity of the situation, Paul idolized his father, viewing him through a lens of admiration and heroism. The untimely demise of Peter in 2000, succumbing to a heart attack in the midst of their life in Saudi Arabia, left an indelible mark on Paul's psyche. It cast a shadow over his existence, shaping the trajectory of his fate in ways both profound and ominous. As the trial unfolded on November 7, 2005, a hushed courtroom bore witness to a startling revelation. Paul, in a dramatic turn of events, stunned onlookers by entering a guilty plea. Joanne's family, bracing themselves for a protracted and grueling legal battle, found themselves thrust into a realm of disbelief and uncertainty. In a moment of collective astonishment, they whispered affirmations as Paul's admission reverberated through the chamber. Throughout the proceedings, Paul maintained a stoic demeanor, his gaze fixed straight ahead or cast downward, deliberately avoiding the piercing stares of Joanne's grieving loved ones and the scrutiny of law enforcement. Not a flicker of emotion crossed his impassive countenance, not even during the formal announcement of the charges against him. His lawyer, Harry Barrell, stood before the court, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. With unwavering resolve, he conceded that there could be no excuse for the heinous act perpetrated by his client. In the wake of Paul's shocking confession, a pall of solemnity descended upon the courtroom, marking the beginning of a harrowing journey toward justice and closure. On Tuesday, November 8th, nearly 10 months after the tragic murder, Paul received his sentence: life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. Remarkably, just 14 years later, in November 2019, at the age of 45, Paul found himself transferred to an open prison and recommended for day release. The parole board cited Paul's active engagement in self-awareness programs and successful completion of an intensive interpersonal relationship improvement program. Recalling the day of Joanne's disappearance, Katie was struck by Paul's behavior. She now regrets offering him comfort when he appeared at her doorstep. Later, when Paul wandered off, Katie, consumed by worry, searched for him. Finding him at the bus stop, She squeezed his hands in an attempt to provide support as he sat there, overcome with emotion. She even embraced him, hoping to offer solace. Reflecting on the moment, Katie admitted she hadn't initially noticed the scratches on his arm, but upon later reflection, she couldn't forgive herself for missing them. The easing of Paul's detention conditions and the prospect of day release stirred deep emotional turmoil within Joanne's family. Katie, speaking to the media, expressed their sense of loss and confusion in the face of this news. Paul's impending release dredged up painful memories of Joanne's untimely death, leaving the family grappling with a sense of injustice. Despite their belief that Paul didn't deserve such leniency for his heinous actions, this here story is about 26-year-old Elle Edwards. On Christmas Eve 2022, she was celebrating with her friends in a pub in Ali Village, Liverpool, UK. The gal was real vibrant and beautiful. She worked as a cosmetologist in a local beauty salon and was also an assistant to a dermatologist. Elle was naturally positive and mighty kind, which allowed her to win over even the most demanding clients. Elle was purty and had become an excellent specialist in her fields. The gal was cheerful and always smiling, but at the same time she remained determined, constantly moving towards her goals and dreams. On December 24th, G22, her sister Lucy flew in from Dubai to spend the holidays with the family, and Elle eagerly awaited her return. They decided to celebrate this long-awaited event in style, so the girls and their friends headed to the local pub. Here they had a great time, laughing a lot, dancing, and singing karaoke. In the merry atmosphere, no one noticed that a person to whom kindness was alien was nearby. Around 11:50 p.m., an emergency call came in. As they were exiling the pub, no less than 12 shots were fired, and 2 of them hit Elle. She suffered a gunshot wound to the head that proved to be mighty serious. The dispatcher directed emergency services to the same. They urgently arrived at the pub, loaded the gal into an ambulance, and took her to the local hospital. However, she died on the way, as her injuries was incompatible with life. When the police informed the victim's family about the tragedy, they was in a state of shock. No one believed it, and no one understood how this could have happened to Elle. No one suspected that this beautiful and cheerful girl could have had deadly enemies. In the early stages of the investigation, the detectives had no leads. The assailant had attacked unexpectedly and disappeared just as mysteriously, leaving only a shell casing and the bleeding victim at the crime scene. The attack was sudden but well planned and gave Elle no chance of survival. But was the gal the true target of the attack, or did she become a random victim of a madman? An unknown car stopped near the pub entrance, and minutes later the shooting started. In addition to the deceased, 4 other men received gunshot wounds of varying severity, all of them young people aged 22 to 33 who were spending the evening in the establishment and lived in the nearby towns. Initially, the police were inclined to believe that the murdered woman was a random victim. It was known that criminal gangs were operating in the area periodically. The shooting was likely a routine showdown between their members. However, all of this was just conjecture, which would have to be proven or disproved in the course of the investigation. So the detectives delved deeper into the victim's personality. Like the witnesses to the crime, the victim's relatives were at a loss as to who could have wanted Elle's death, as the girl seemed to have no ill wishes or enemies capable of such horrors. The detectives decided to interview other witnesses and the victims of the unknown criminal's gunfire. In addition, law enforcement officers requested the pub owner's video surveillance recordings. It would be necessary to talk to dozens of people and analyze several hours of video recordings. Several police officers were working on the extensive investigation. It was necessary to answer several difficult questions. There were too many victims of the attack. But was this spontaneous aggression? Or did the perpetrator pursue a specific target? All witnesses to the incident were interrogated. However, checking mobile communications data took more time. The media were notified to assist in the investigation. Law enforcement officers urged anyone with valuable information to come to the police station. First and foremost, this concerned possible video recordings made by random eyewitnesses, on any of which the car in which the aggressor arrived might appear. After the crime, the police held a meeting with local residents. The purpose of this communication was to persuade people possessing valuable information to share it with law enforcement officers. It was assumed that someone might have seen the moment of the attack or know the criminal. People were urged not to be afraid of the criminals and the local feuding clans. Community leaders supported local residents during this difficult time. In addition to the conversations, activists went door to door and communicated with the neighbors. Special trained officers worked with the family of the deceased, their goal being to provide them with support in connection with the heavy loss. In the course of this work, it was established that the perpetrator had left the pub parking lot in a dark-colored car. Eyewitness accounts regarding it may differ. It was dark, and it was difficult to make out anything, but the most likely was a dark Mercedes A-Class. Later, this was confirmed after checking the outdoor surveillance cameras. The killer did not immediately open fire, but drove up to the parking lot and observed the pub visitors for some time. He sat in the car so that he could freely see the entrance and most of what was happening inside. Apparently, he was choosing the most convenient moment for the attack. After a few minutes of surveillance, when L came out, the criminal quickly got out of the car, fired 12 shots, then instantly got back behind the wheel and disappeared. Investigators, after studying the recordings, made an important conclusion. The attacker was alone. No one helped him. It was not possible to trace the exact location where the perpetrator fled. Therefore, the detectives went door to door to all local residents, describing the car and recounting the circumstances of the incident, trying to establish the identity of the killer. Patrolling the streets was carried out around the clock, and this yielded results. Just 2 days after the shooting, detectives detained 2 suspects. But no names were mentioned until all the circumstances were clarified. However, it was not possible to prove their involvement in the crime, in particular because the murder weapon was not found. After that, the detectives made a statement to the public, saying that they would not rest until the unknown shooter was punished. All this was intended to calm the local residents, who were outraged by the rampant crime and the powerlessness of the authorities. It was also assumed that the attack had been provoked by a feud between local gangs. In this case, L would be considered a random victim. However, all this was also just an assumption that remained to be verified. In the course of the investigation, it was possible to establish that the potential targets could have been Jake Dutley and Kiram Seld, members of the local Beechwood gang, who were spending the evening in the pub. It became known that they had been in long-term, fierce conflict with another group claiming this territory. On December 29, the police arrested another person, but he was not the one who opened fire. The suspect had a solid alibi that excluded him from the list of suspects. However, the detective suspected that he had participated in the setup for the attack. Around the same time, the dark Mercedes car in which the killer had left the pub parking lot was identified, but due to the lack of direct evidence, the name of the third suspect was also not disclosed. There were some difficulties with the found car. The car was traced through video surveillance systems and identified thanks to the cameras, but law enforcement officers were too late. On December 31, the police department received the report that a fire had started near the scene of the shooting. When the special services arrived at the scene, they found a dark Mercedes similar to the perpetrator's vehicle, which was engulfed in flames. The vehicle was completely burned out. Valuable evidence was lost in the flames. The perpetrators clearly knew that the police were on their trail, so they decided to destroy one of the direct pieces of evidence. Despite the fact that the fire did not completely destroy the car, it was confirmed that it had been used during the shooting. However, the Mercedes did not belong to the perpetrators, but had been stolen shortly before the attack. Presumably, the arson was committed intentionally to complicate the investigation after the murder of competitors. On January 11, 2 more suspects, a 22-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman, were delivered to the police department. They were arrested in Central Wales. The man's name was Connor Chapman. He was well known to the police. He had an extensive criminal record that he had accumulated over the past 5 years before the murder of L. Edwardsa. Connor had started with daring lawbreakings and gradually sank deeper into the abyss of crime. One of his first serious crimes was a car theft under aggravating circumstances. He had repeatedly become a suspect in robberies, hooliganism, and threatening behavior. Once the young man was involved in a chase with the police, after which he abandoned the car and hid in the bushes nearby. When they detained him, the criminal said that he did not understand what chase they were talking about and that he was here just waiting for a friend. In this case, he became the real star. The detainee's data ended up in newspaper headlines. Connor Chapman was from Birkenhead, Liverpool. His parents had left him at an early age, so his grandparents had formalized guardianship. It was in a house that the hero of the story moved. The teenager dropped out of high school shortly before the exams. In general, he studied poorly and no special hopes were pinned on him. He was always considered a problem child. The young hooligan first became a defendant in a court case in 2014, when he was 14 years old. Connor was accused of shoplifting. As early as 2016, he committed another crime. His involvement in the theft of a car was proven when the young man was detained in a stolen vehicle. He did not have a driver's license or insurance, which was a violation of the terms of his suspended sentence. In 2017, car theft was added to the storage of prohibited substances. During this period, he was also under police supervision, so he had again violated the restraining order. As a result, he was banned from accessing several parts of the city. Connor was not allowed to appear in public places, as he clearly posed a threat to society. However, as early as 2019, he violated the ban again. The patrol detained him in a public place. The young man had a knife and prohibited substances with him. In the same year, the general public first heard about Connor Chaplin. He appeared on the pages of the local newspaper after an unsuccessful attempt to escape from the police in a stolen car. The city patrol noticed a stolen Audi on the street and ordered the driver to stop and get out of the car with his hands up. However, the 18-year-old Chapman did not obey, provoking a chase. During the short flight, Connor committed a large number of traffic violations. In particular, he accelerated to more than 80 kilometers per hour in areas with a 30-kilometer limit. Connor repeatedly drove into oncoming traffic and in the end crashed into the curb. At the beat, the car was thrown aside and turned around. The driver could not continue the orgy, so he got out of the car and ran away. However, even here he was unlucky, as the patrol caught up with him in the bushes just a few hundred meters away. In his defense, the young man said that he was waiting here for a friend, but the deception was obvious. The lawyer of Connor explained in court that his client had fallen under the influence of a bad company of older frays. The court left him unpunished and the need to release the budding criminal. He was found to have attention deficit disorder and a number of other disorders identified by private specialists during the trial. Despite this, due to numerous violations and potentially dangerous behavior on the road, he was sentenced to a term of up to 8 months in prison for 2 minors. The young man also received a ban on driving a car, which was in effect after his release. Thus, the budding criminal had achieved 14 convictions for 30 criminal episodes by the time he reached adulthood. It was obvious that he had no intention of changing and categorically refused to fit into society. Everyone understood that he was potentially dangerous, but legal grounds for isolating him from society had not been found. This was due to the fact that so far no person had been seriously injured by his inadequate behavior. The public was outraged by the powerlessness of the authorities. Everything was shaping up so that the criminal elements could do nothing until they kill or maim innocent people. And that's how it turned out. In January 2020, the court again sentenced Connor Chapman, this time to 10 months in prison. He was again caught in a public place with a cold weapon and substances in his pocket. A whole bouquet of prohibitive lists. During this period, the police openly appeared on TV channels, urging the public to beware of this young man. After serving his sentence, protected months, he again got involved in crime and was wanted for at least 5 criminal episodes. When he was caught, the young criminal said that he had spent more time behind bars than free, and he did not seem upset about this, but rather proud of his achievements. However, Connor had no intention of stopping there. By the age of 20, his service record had expanded again. By this point, he had received 19 sentences for 43 crimes. But in the summer of 2022, the inadequate young man found himself free again. This happened just 6 months before the death of L. Edwardser. During this period, Connor was again brought before the court. His lawyer tried to play on pity, telling the story that the first child of the young man was born while he was in prison. At this point, his girlfriend was pregnant with a girl. The young man claimed that he had rethought his life and wanted to get on the path of correction. Of course, these were loud, false words. The only thing he wanted was to get free and return to the path of crime. During this period, the police already knew that he was a member of one of the local criminal gangs engaged in the sale of prohibited substances. However, the criminal was tried not for these serious crimes, but for burglary and theft of 2 electric motorcycles. On December 24, 2022, a skirmish broke out between 2 rival criminal gangs. They began to argue over the division of the territory near the wooden church in Beechwood Estates. They failed to reach an agreement, after which the young gangster decided to take revenge. He armed himself with a submachine gun and waited for about 3 hours until he tracked down his targets. He wanted to kill Karen Seld and Jake Duffy, who had gone to the Moyak pub for rest. Shortly before midnight, the criminal drove up to the parking lot and began to observe. He identified his victims and waited for the right moment to attack, then ran out of the car and fired 12 bullets into the building. He managed to seriously injure Duffy, but despite the threat to his life, he survived the attack. However, the unlucky Elle Edwardser was not so fortunate. 2 bullets hit her in the head. The young beauty fought for her life, but died in the arms of the medics on the way to the hospital. The girl accidentally met the killer's targets that evening and did not even suspect that the festive revelry could end so tragically. The pub was crowded. Then 1 person was killed and 4 were wounded. One 22-year-old man was shot in the leg, a 24-year-old young man was wounded in the arm, and a 33-year-old man in the wrist. None of these injuries were life-threatening. Elle's friends tried to provide her with assistance and perform artificial respiration right on the spot. However, this was not enough to save her life. Elle's sister Lucy was much like Dia. She lived in Dubai and flew home to celebrate Christmas with her family. Just minutes before the attack, she had left the establishment, so she was not affected at all. Later, Lucy recalled how she had wanted to take her sister with her, but the girl wanted to stay with her friends. On January 25, 2023, the funeral of the young girl took place. Hundreds of concerned people came to say goodbye to the random victim of gang showdowns. The body was brought to the local church in a hearse drawn by 4 white horses. Even the pub that had become the site of the girl's last celebration was closed that day as a mark of respect for her memory. The owner of the establishment published a message of support for Elle's family on his official social media page. Connor Chapman was charged with a whole list of charges, the main one of which was murder. It became known that the perpetrator had an accomplice, namely the 20-year-old Thomas. After the arrest and during the searches, a video recording was found on this young man, which had been made shortly before the attack. In it, Connor is handing over a weapon and saying that he is going to settle accounts with someone. After the attack, they together hid the stolen Mercedes in order to get rid of it later. The murder weapon was never found. However, the killer's DNA traces were found on one of the shell casings fired. It was obvious that it was Connor who loaded the weapon before the attack. In addition, red gloves were found during searches in his house, which were clearly visible in the CCTV footage from morning. After the crime, when the perpetrators had abandoned the car, they ordered a taxi under a false name. They used the driver's services to cover their tracks and confuse the investigation. Around 5 a.m. they returned to the place where the hidden car was located. Here the criminals tried to cover their tracks. However, something went wrong. Ultimately, they decided to get rid of the car by setting it on fire. Thomas Nord was found guilty on all charges brought against him. In July 2023, the court sentenced him to 9 years in prison. This modest sentence was due to the fact that he had not yet managed to accumulate such a wide criminal history as his accomplice. Jake and Karen were wounded in the moment of the attack, but both managed to survive the assault. A look at their lifestyle made the aggression of one of the members of the rival gangs quite understandable. Both were members of the local Beechwood gang, which was openly in conflict with another group claiming this territory. It became known that on December 23, 2023, just a day before the attack with firearms, they had already been attacked. On that occasion, another person from Connor Chapman's group had assaulted them. Both were beaten, but did not receive serious injuries. Apparently, they considered this a random fight and calmly went to relax in the pub. While the shooter awaited his sentence in the case of the murder of the innocent victim, both targets of his attack were already in prison. Curran was sentenced to 27 months in prison for an attack on members of the rival criminal group. Another 9 months were added to the sentence for the fight. His friend was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months for a similar offense. Obviously, they were trying to avenge the attempted murder. Prohibitive court orders were also issued against both of them, with a whole list of restrictions. Of course, this method did not allow protecting citizens from this gang of criminals. However, in case of further violations, more severe punishment could be applied to them due to ignoring the prescriptions. The public was outraged that potentially dangerous members of criminal gangs were getting away with minimum sentences after each crime. The bans were clearly ineffective and did not contribute absolutely anything to public safety. This became especially obvious when it was found that Chapman already had a ban on visiting that region where the pub was located. But this did not prevent him from stealing a car and coming to the public place, despite the fact that he also had a driving ban. The events that had occurred once again raised the question of toughening punishments and revising the existing norms of the legal system. However, so far this flawed system has not suffered any serious changes. At the trial on the case of Elle's murder, Connor tried to refute that it was he who appeared on the CCTV footage. According to him, during this period he was at home, packing Christmas gifts. However, a sufficient amount of evidence was collected to expose the lie. The hearings on the case lasted 3.5 weeks, during which all the circumstances preceding the attack were revealed. It became known that the reason for the attack was only the competition between the two criminal gangs dividing the territory nearby. The defendant did not even know the victim. He simply did not care about her fate, as well as the fate of all the other innocent people in the bar. He was driven only by blind fury, which he could never control. After the attempted murder of 2 competitors, Connor planned to flee to Spain to cover his tracks. He used a stolen car and also got rid of the murder weapon. Trying not to fall into the hands of the police, he avoided using any mode of transport. The detectives detained the criminal literally at the airport. After the arrest, Connor tried to deceive the police, claiming that the Mercedes he was seen driving on the day of the murder was not stolen. According to him, this was a common car of the criminal group, which they used for the distribution of substances. The guy claimed that he was not behind the wheel of the vehicle and also continued to convince the jury that he did not open fire that evening. He was desperately trying to get out of the situation. The defendant stated that he had only just learned that someone from the criminal group had used the vehicle for an attack on the pub. Before the jury retired to consider the verdict, the father of the innocent victim made a short speech. He sincerely hoped that the criminal would never again be able to spend Christmas with his loved ones in freedom. The jurors, consisting of Pityashin and Sanjenshin, came to a unanimous decision after 3 hours of discussion. In their opinion, Connor Chapman was guilty of all the charges brought against him. He cynically committed the crime and did not repent of the fact that he accidentally killed the beautiful 26-year-old girl. The whole life that lay ahead of her, and he took it away. Instead of remorse, the heartless Connor spent several days carefully getting rid of all the evidence and traces of the murder that could link him to this bloody event. The motive for the attack was the competition between criminal gangs. On July 7, 2023, Connor was sentenced. He was sent to serve a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 48 years from the start of serving the sentence. After the verdict was announced, the victim's father victoriously raised his fist. The incident provoked a wave of public outrage. The residents of the city could not feel safe, knowing that they were at the junction of the confrontation between criminal gangs dividing spheres of influence. They knew that these people had a large amount of firearms and were not afraid to use them, as proved by the murder of Elle. The girl's father said he wanted to set up a foundation to support victims like his daughter. He believed that the main goal would be to fight to reduce the number of weapons in the hands of civilians. The case of Lisa Cecilia Hardum, the fiancée of a tyrant who turned a luxury apartment into a prison. Controlling behavior in couple relationships, unfortunately, is not uncommon and quite dangerous. It manifests itself when a person tries to subjugate and forcibly adapt their other half to their own needs through intimidation, demonstrations of strength and power, as well as humiliation and total control. Often the victim, because of the instilled feelings of fear and guilt, does not realize that he or she is in a destructive situation. The story of a young woman named Lisa Cecilia Hardum illustrates what a relationship with a control freak can lead to. She naively believed that she had met the love of her life, but she herself did not notice how her fiancé became a monster who turned their luxurious apartment into a real prison with 24-hour video surveillance. This case provoked an international scandal and was widely covered in the press. The unfortunate Lisa tried to make Lisa look mentally unstable and cold-blooded crime to pass off as an accident or voluntary resignation from life. However, the perpetrator, despite his money and connections, did not manage to escape responsibility. Now let's understand how her beloved man turned into a monster who hid his inhuman attitude behind care. Lisa Cecilia Hardum, biography, family, early years. Our today's heroine was born in Canada on June 12, 1981, in the suburbs of Toronto, and was the second child in the family. Lisa was brought up together with her older brother Jason, with whom she has always been very close. They were raised independently by single mom Joanna. Brother and sister did not remember their father because he left the family when the children were very young and no longer took any part in their lives. Lisa Cecilia grew up as an active and purposeful girl. From an early age, she was involved in sports. Together with her brother, went to the martial arts section, liked to play soccer and volleyball. But her main passion has always been ballet. She daily visited the dance studio where she practiced at the bar for several hours. The girl from childhood was tall and slender, but professional ballet classes required the strictest diet, which had a detrimental effect on the growing body. In adolescence, Lisa developed anorexia on the background of eating disorders. For a long time, she kept silent about her problem, believing that she could cope with everything herself. But when her weight approached critically low values, her mother sounded the alarm and put her daughter in the clinic, where Lisa needed to spend several months to restore health and weight gain. After graduating from school, the girl continued dancing classes and also decided to connect her life with the beauty industry. In parallel with her university studies, she got a job as a perfumer in one of the stores of a large cosmetics chain, and in her spare time, she studied the subtleties of makeup and hairdressing, moving to Australia. In 2005, having celebrated her 24th birthday, Lisa decided to make drastic changes in her life. She wanted to go to the other side of the world, to Australia, and there were several reasons for that. Firstly, she wanted to live in a warmer and milder climate. And secondly, Lisa wanted to see the world. She took a one-year work visa and traveled to another continent. However, with her then flew Joanna, who accompanied her daughter for the first few months to make sure that she was all right, and she settled well in the new place. The mother then returned back to Toronto with peace of mind, making sure her daughter could take care of herself. Lisa settled in Sydney, where she rented a cozy apartment and soon got a job at a local small cosmetology company. After her visa expired, she decided to move to Australia permanently. First, she extended her stay for another year, and then began to prepare the necessary documents to obtain citizenship of this country. Personal life. As for personal life, in this respect, everything was not easy. The fact is that Lisa always preferred to meet with older men. Obviously, not the least role in this played a lack of a father in the family, so she always reached out to more mature men, looking for support and protection in them. In 2006, Lisa successfully interviewed for a job at Sydney Cosmetics and was hired. She soon began in a romantic relationship with a co-worker who was almost twice her age. A few months later, they decided to start living together, and Lisa moved into the apartment of her lover. And after a couple more months, the girl introduced her boyfriend to her mom and brother, and they approved her choice. The couple traveled a lot around the world, rested in the Seychelles in Paris, and also visited the famous carnival in Rio de Janeiro. The man even made Lisa a marriage proposal, which she gladly accepted. But about a year after the engagement, the lovers broke up. Lisa did not go into detail about the reasons for this decision, but hinted that too great a difference in age, however, played in this not the least role. In 2010, Lisa graduated from the Sydney College of Stylists and got a job as a hairdresser in a popular beauty salon, where she quickly won the respect of colleagues and the trust of customers. At the same time, a new boyfriend appeared in her life, but their romance did not last long because Lisa found out that he was married. Destroy someone else's family she was not going to, so she quickly broke off the relationship. But shortly before that, at one of the parties, this guy introduced her friend, a businessman named Simon Gitney. This acquaintance turned out to be fatal for Lisa. Who is Simon Gitney? Simon was born in Maryland in December 1973 in a very religious, large family of immigrants from Lebanon. He had 5 other siblings, whom his parents raised in strictness and obedience. However, Simon from a young age had problems with controlling emotions and outbursts of anger, and he was also possessive, did not tolerate rejection, and often gave the will of his fists. All this eventually led to serious problems with the law. The first time Gitney was behind bars was at the age of 18, when he came to his ex-girlfriend in the store where she worked and began to openly molest her. The store owner interceded for the girl and threw the impudent man out the door, but Simon returned with friends who grabbed the store owner and held him, while Simon beat him severely. That time the guy only served a few months and was released on bail for good behavior afterwards. But 3 years later, he was arrested again. this time on theft charges. However, Simon resisted violently, threw himself into a fight, and bit off one of the policeman's earlobe. He was threatened with a serious prison sentence for this prank, but the pastor of the Lebanese Christian church, of which his entire family was members, interceded. As a result, the young man spent only a year and a half in prison. In 2000, Simon again came to the attention of the police, and this time he was arrested for possession and distribution of illegal substances. But the sentence was again extremely lenient, and he served 2 years out of the 4 assigned to him. On release, Gitami, as it seemed to everyone, took the path of correction. He moved to Sydney, where with a few friends founded a fairly successful business for the production and sale of luxury women's shoes. This business brought a stable high income, so Simon quickly became rich, acquired luxury real estate in a prestigious neighborhood, a premium class car, and carefully tried to hide from everyone his rich criminal past. From his roommates to his lovers. At that party, Simon and Lisa exchanged phone numbers, and soon he called her himself. Their relaxed communication somehow imperceptibly grew into a buddy relationship, and when in January 2010 Lisa complained that she was unhappy with her current living conditions and would like to rent an apartment in another neighborhood, Itani kindly offered her to live for free in one of the rooms of his luxurious apartment while she was looking for a suitable place to rent. Lisa accepted the offer, although her mother was somewhat alarmed by this turn of events. But Lisa convinced Joanna that it was a temporary measure and that she and Simon are just friends. By the way, she herself at that time thought that the man who so carefully monitors his appearance and adores piercings preferred to build relationships with guys. But this opinion turned out to be wrong. For the first couple of months, Gitani really kept his distance. The young people lived in separate rooms, and there was not even a hint of intimacy or romance between them. But gradually they got closer, the so-called spark, and started a romance which quickly gained momentum. At the time of the beginning of their relationship, Simon was 37 years old, and Lisa, 28. Simon seemed to her a beautiful prince from a fairy tale. He was sociable, cheerful, spoiled his beloved with gifts, and arranged her pleasant surprises. The couple began to appear everywhere together. In particular, they went together to an elite sports club, which Simon attended regularly for many years. Lisa was sure that finally met her true love and will live a long, happy life with the chosen one. She raved about him to her mother, brother, and friends, and had no idea that this fairy tale would soon end. An affectionate tyrant. Just 6 months after the beginning of the relationship, Simon's behavior began to change, but it happened in stages and in such a way that Lisa did not notice anything, thinking that the lover does everything for her own good. He gradually distanced Lisa from friends and family, erased all her personal boundaries, tried to change her views, tastes, and behavior, adjusting them to his needs. In June 2010, shortly after Lisa celebrated her 29th birthday, Simon began to persistently persuade her to quit her job, claiming that she was not valued there and she could find a better paid position. But Lisa loved working at the beauty salon, where she had many regular clients and was happy with her income, so she didn't understand why she should quit her job and refuse to do so. Simon was not satisfied with the refusal, and in August of the same year, he showed up at Lisa's salon, having thrown a loud scandal, which actually forced her to write a letter of resignation. Lisa Hardam was shocked by his behavior, but Gitani assured that it would be better, and in general, she can no longer work, because his income will allow them both to live comfortably, nothing to deny themselves. A month and a half later, the couple moved into a new luxury apartment, located on the 15th floor of an elite residential complex. As it later turned out, the room was literally stuffed with hidden surveillance cameras, of which Lisa, of course, did not even guess. Simon gave his beloved an expensive smartphone and laptop, pre-installed on them spyware that allowed him to track all her messages, emails, as well as listen to calls and see all of Lisa's movements. In addition, Simon gained access to her social media accounts and began to discreetly clean lists of friends, delete posts and photos at his discretion, as well as read personal correspondence. Total control. Gitani's control over Lisa increased day by day, but as an experienced manipulator, he made it look as if his girlfriend wanted to do as he told her. Gaetani had invaded literally every aspect of her life, leaving no hint of privacy. He forbade Lisa to use cosmetics, claiming that she does too bright makeup, which makes her look vulgar. He also bought her clothes in unsightly clothes in gray and black colors, and all her outfits simply threw away, arguing that they were too revealing, and men would stare at her. From the apartment, Lisa went out only accompanied by her lover. They visited together only those places that he himself chose. Simon even forbade her to visit the gym. Instead, he bought several expensive exercise machines, saying that now she could train at home. Lisa's social media friend lists were dwindling by the day, and eventually Gaetani convinced her to delete the accounts. Lisa also had no friends left in real life, and all her contacts and calls were closely monitored. Simon only allowed her to communicate with her mother and brother. Last trip home. In December 2010, Lisa decided to fly to Canada to celebrate Christmas with her family. Simon was going to fly with her, but at the last moment his plans were disrupted because of urgent business matters. He didn't plan to let his friend go alone, but she literally begged him, because she hadn't seen her mom and brother for over a year. In the end, he agreed, but set strict conditions and rules, which she had to strictly follow. Jason and Joanna were shocked at the changes that had happened to Lisa over the past year. She was nothing like the bright and cheerful beauty she had been before. She had literally become her own shadow. There was not a drop of makeup on her face. Her luxurious hair was pulled into a ponytail and hidden under a headdress. Her clothes were baggy, unattractive, and completely black. But it wasn't even the outward changes that were the most frightening. Lisa flinched every time the phone rang and instantly grabbed the receiver. It was one of Simon's conditions. She had to answer immediately, at any time of day, no matter what she was doing at that moment. Lisa stayed at her mother's house all the time, refused to see her friends, and hardly ever went out. Joanna was alarmed and frightened by this behavior of her daughter, and she decided to have a heart-to-heart talk with her. Then Lisa burst into tears and admitted that Simon always knows where she is, with whom she communicates, and what she talks about on the phone. Lisa also revealed that Simon doesn't allow her to work, see her friends, go to the gym, or have any hobbies. In fact, she had no friends left at all. Her mother was shocked. She began to persuade her daughter to stay in Canada, because in Australia she has nothing to keep her. But Lisa said that she loved Simon and did not want to break off the relationship with him. Lisa was sure that this is just a transitional period in their relationship, because they have been together for less than a year, and soon he will calm down and loosen his grip. She also added that her lover cares about her and wishes her only good. Despite pleas from her family to stay and attempts to convince Lisa that the relationship was unhealthy, she decided to move back to Australia to stay with Gaetani. Lisa reassured her mother, saying that there was nothing to worry about and that Simon loved her and would not hurt her. Prisoner. After Lisa returned, the situation only got worse. Simon forbade her to leave the apartment, and if they went out together, she had to look only at her feet so as not to meet the eyes of other men. Moreover, Simon began to call Lisa by her second name, Cecilia, because it seemed more decent to him. In the spring of 2011, Lisa began to complain of pain in her leg. It was an old injury received in his youth during ballet classes. But instead of taking her to the hospital, Gaetani hired a female physical therapist who came to their home 3 times a week to give her massages. She soon became Lisa's only friend and confidant, to whom Lisa spoke candidly about the difficult situation she found herself in. On June 12th, for Lisa's 30th birthday, Simon decided to throw a party at the most expensive restaurant in Sydney, but among the guests were only Simon's relatives and people from his inner circle. Lisa, on her own birthday, boyfriend did not allow to invite anyone. At the end of the evening, Simon proposed to Lisa by putting a ring on her finger. Hardem responded with consent and then cried, but all present noticed that these were not tears of joy, but rather tears of despair and hopelessness. Back home, Lisa called her mother and informed her of her engagement, sobbing into the phone. But Joanna was not at all happy about it. She began to persuade her daughter to leave this man and, as soon as possible, to return home to Canada. In response, Lisa only asked her mother never to start such conversations on the phone. At that moment, She already realized that the fiancé was listening to the calls, although she did not know for sure. Escape plan. For a while, Lisa tried to distract herself with thoughts of the upcoming wedding and began planning the festivities. When she decided to consult with Simon about something related to the event, he rudely cut her off and told her that he would choose the place, buy her address, and make the guest list. Lisa was utterly crushed, for she had no say even here. During another visit to the physiotherapist, Lisa admitted that she couldn't go on like this, but she couldn't leave because her fiancé wouldn't let her go. Together, they developed a plan according to which Lisa, at each visit of the masseuse, gave her some of her belongings for safekeeping, but did everything so that Simon did not notice anything. On July 28th, Simon left his laptop at home in a hurry, which he usually carried with him everywhere. Lisa took advantage of this and looked into it, and her worst fears were realized. There she found a spyware program, with the help of which the fiancé received all the data from her phone, as well as numerous recordings of her conversations with her mother. But the most horrifying discovery was the surveillance footage from the security cameras located in every room of their apartment. That same day, Lisa, using her physical therapist's phone, called her mother and asked her to come on the next flight to her apartment and take her home. However, Joanna could not leave work so quickly. She needed time to ask for an excuse to switch shifts with one of her colleagues. Afterwards, the woman could never forgive herself for this delay. Back home, Simon immediately realized that his fiancée had taken his laptop and seen the spyware. Lisa cried, trying to figure out why she deserved to be treated that way, but Simon only pointed out that he'd done it for her own good. Accident or murder? The next day, July 29th, a serious conversation took place between the young people, the recording of which was later presented in court. Lisa was in tears and asked to go home, but Gittani calmly and confidently said that this would never happen, asked Lisa to calm down, and claimed that she had mental problems. On the morning of July 30th, 2011, Lisa got up early, got fully dressed, and put her documents and essentials in her purse. She locked herself in the bathroom and called her mother one last time, telling her that if anything happened to her, it would be Simon's fault. Apparently, Lisa wanted to leave the apartment unnoticed while her fiancé slept, but she failed. What happened next can only be guessed. According to neighbors, they heard a scream in the hallway, but did not have time to react because all abruptly hushed. And exactly a minute later, a young woman fell from the balcony of the 15th floor, crashing to her death. Several passers-by on the street also heard the scream and saw a body falling from a height, but did not have time to realize what was happening. According to a guy who was walking his dog that morning and was closest to the scene, he heard a noise and looked up. The eyewitness saw a man holding something large, which he then threw down. When passers-by came to the place of the fall, they saw a young woman lying on the ground, but all attempts to help her were in vain, as she died instantly, having received extensive injuries. 3 minutes later, Gittani, dressed in his pajamas, ran out into the street. He was crying, saying he didn't know how he was going to live his life, and claiming that he hadn't caught his fiancée in time. At first glance, it looked like an accident, but Simon himself was quick to claim that his fiancée had voluntarily passed away. A note in his pocket and a frightening video. Strange things began as soon as the body was taken to the morgue and examined. In different pockets were found fragments of a note torn into small pieces with the text, "There are cameras everywhere in the apartment." Probably Lisa was afraid that Simon might find the message, so she turned the note into a kind of garbage and scattered it in different pockets. A check showed that there were indeed a lot of cameras in the apartment, but the hard disk with recordings could not be found, and Simon claimed that there was no video recording at all. A surveillance camera in the communal hallway, on the other hand, captured something frightening. The short clip shows Lisa running out of the apartment and calling for help, but her fiancé grabs her from behind, covers her mouth, and drags her back in. This happened a minute before she fell off the balcony, and it was this scream that the neighbors heard. And Gittani's laptop was found to contain a recording of a conversation he and Lisa had the night before the tragedy, as well as spyware that Simon used to spy on his fiancée. According to Simon, He and Lisa had an argument that morning, and she became hysterical. She ran out into the hallway screaming, but he brought her back because he didn't want to put on a show for the neighbors. In the apartment, he picked up the phone to call her mother, but Lisa ran out to the balcony at that moment and threw herself down, and he ran after her but did not catch her in time. He claimed that she had threatened to take her own life before, but he didn't take her words seriously. But Gittani attributed the spy program to his concern for his fiancée's safety. Trial and sentencing. In the course of the trial, Simon was accompanied by already a new pasta, 22-year-old model Rachel Louise, who was just incredibly similar to his dead fiancée. However, later it was said that the girl just wanted to become famous at the expense of this high-profile case, and therefore willingly talked to the press and appeared on television, saying that Gittani would never raise his hand on a woman. Simon's lawyers tried to convince the court that Lisa suffered from a mental disorder, was prone to hysterics, and could have voluntarily passed away. Even a long history of anorexia and treatment in a clinic came up. The defense also argued that the defendant, being short in stature, simply could not physically lift Lisa, who was taller than him, and also could not throw her off the balcony. But this version was refuted by a trainer from the gym, which Simon had attended regularly for many years. According to the trainer, the defendant worked with heavy weights, was much stronger than he appeared outwardly, and could easily have lifted Lisa. This was also supported by the absence of Lisa's fingerprints on the railing and the glass barrier, as she could not have jumped without leaning on them. Also testifying in court was the physiotherapist to whom Lisa had told in detail everything that had happened to her and had given her her belongings, in the hope of escaping from the tyrant. It was her testimony that was decisive. Gittani was found guilty of murdering his fiancée and sentenced to 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. After the verdict was announced, Rachel Louise threw a tantrum and began to insult the judge, for which she was removed from the room. All attempts by Simon and his lawyers to challenge the court's decision were rejected, and the verdict remained in force. Rachel soon dumped her boyfriend, saying in an interview that it was difficult for them to maintain a relationship in prison, but she remains convinced of his innocence.